Chapter 1346. Lu Qingyan hesitated for a moment and said, "You said that Biyao is powerless among the vassals, but I don't agree." Yen Song turned his head. "Oh." Unexpectedly, Lu Qingyan only said something that did not seem to make sense. She asked, "I think that as long as the general is here, the world will not be in chaos. Biyao will not dare to go south, West Chu will not dare to send troops, and Nanjiang will continue to be dormant. What do you think?" Yen Song was silent for a long time. Yen Song, who seemed to be absent-minded, sighed softly and nodded. "I see. This old man understands." Lu Qingyan quickly said, "I don't dare." The old man looked away with a complicated expression and looked at Su Fengnian. "If I remember correctly, you once said in Tai and City that you would do something for the people of the Central Plains?" Su Fengnian asked, "How did you guess?" Yen Song said calmly, "For a woman to have such knowledge, she must be the daughter of a big family. She also has a Qingzhou accent. Coincidentally, I have worked with Lu Feiqi, who is the backbone of the Green Party, in the imperial court for many years. Then, her identity and your identity will naturally come to light." The old man snorted and turned to leave. Most of the Yen disciples did not know why their ancestor's face suddenly turned from sunny to gloomy. They just followed him down the mountain uneasily. They thought that the trip to Wudang Mountain was a trip with high spirits but ended with disappointment. Lu Qingyan said apologetically, "It's my fault for drawing legs on a snake." Su Fengnian touched her cheek and said softly, "Don't worry. The teacher of our Biyang's dean has already prepared to stay in Biyang." Lu Qingyan smiled. A pillar of the country who is not a cabinet minister but better than a cabinet minister betrayed the Central Plains and went to Biyang. This is not good news for the Liang imperial court. Su Fengnian nodded. Yen Song is ending his career for the scholars. Lu Qingyan blinked. Song Dongming is very smart. Su Fengnian reached out and tapped her forehead. "Not as smart as you." Lu Qingyan smiled. Su Fengnian explained, "I didn't just accompany you to the mountain to burn incense and pray for blessings. This is my blessed land. To be precise, this is a part of my territory. When I fought with Wang Xianji, if it wasn't for the Wudang Mountain going all out to set up the Jianghu formation, I wouldn't have had a chance of winning. Ever since he was born, because of his identity, fortune and misfortune were interdependent. The fortune was him, and the misfortune was his family. After I started practicing martial arts, I had many battles where my life was hanging by a thread, but I didn't die every time. Even if my vitality was greatly damaged, I could always recover afterwards. At first, I thought it was strange. Later, when I gradually reached a higher level in martial arts, I understood that the bigger the restaurant, the bigger the customer. I was like a guest going to a restaurant. Although my identity was special and I could often eat exotic delicacies, I still couldn't escape the fate of eating whatever the owner of the restaurant gave me. Huang Longsher had once divulged a heavenly secret, saying that I would probably have to eat my last meal in the next few years, and then there wouldn't be a next meal. This was probably the fate of that me in this life. I guarded the northwest gate, but I died in battle. Biyao was gone, and 300,000 cavalry were gone. I only left a few words in the history books that I didn't know how to praise or criticize, and then this page would be over. What happens to me in the future will depend on how the heavens write the history books." Su Fengnian's eyes were resolute. "But ever since I started practicing the blade, I never thought about accepting my fate. At that time, I was just a useless prince, and I wanted to take revenge against experts like Yang Taisui and Lu Haoshi. Later on the mountain top, I wanted to slay the dragon and the celestials. Now, I want to protect Biyao. I don't want to eat the last meal the heavens gave me. That's why you've also seen it for yourself. The heavens aren't easy to negotiate with either." Very quickly, the worst situation of northern Mang being pressured by 3 fronts appeared. This might be the so-called retribution of the heavenly Tao. Lu Qingyan held Su Fengnian's hand tightly. The cold wind blew against Su Fengnian's face, and he smiled. "You must have suffered a lot to marry me." Lu Qingyan stood shoulder to shoulder with this man. There's joy in the bitterness, and the aftertaste is endless. It's enough for me to eat for several lifetimes. Li Yufu brought his disciple Yufu to the top of the mountain. There were several thatched cottages here, and they were all clean. They only saw Su Fengnian standing on the side of the cliff. Lu Qingyan's body was weak, and she couldn't stand the wind at the top of the mountain, so she went to rest in one of the cottages. Li Yufu walked to Su Fengnian's side, but the little Taoist boy didn't dare to come closer. He stayed a few feet away from the two. Su Fengnian whispered, "Is it easy?" Li Yufu looked back at his disciple and smiled. "It's more troublesome than I thought. This child is stubborn and likes to get to the bottom of things. A few days ago, I helped an old man who came to the mountain to burn incense. It was a bad lot, and his grandson was going to die at the border. This disciple complained about what I did at that time, and was angry with me for several days." Su Fengnian curiously asked, "How did you do it?" Li Yufu replied, "I didn't tell the old man the truth. I only said that it was a good lot, and it's half a blessing and half a curse. It depends on fate." Su Fengnian asked, "What did the child complain about?" Li Yufu said helplessly, "He complained that I shouldn't have lied, or I should have been a good person to the end and changed the lot for the old man's grandson." Su Fengnian thought about it and didn't say anything. He wasn't the little Taoist boy Yufu, so he naturally knew the complexity of the matter. He sighed. It seems that the old chief Wang Zhonglo must have suffered a lot when he had such a little junior brother. Li Yufu smiled but didn't say anything. Su Fengnian whispered, "I've squandered most of the aura of Mount Wudong. I'm sorry." Li Yufu shook his head and said, "Since ancient times, mountains and rivers have spirits." Su Fengnian asked, "Aren't there immortals who are spirits?" Li Yufu smiled and said, "Huang Longshu said that there were immortals in the world, and then there were no more immortals around. The more people know about it, the more they value chivalry. At that time, chivalry will become the backbone of Jianghu and the world. In my opinion, immortal cultivation is too difficult. It's far away, but it's easy to be human. If a difficult thing can't be done, everyone has an excuse. If an easy thing can't be done, it's hard to find an excuse for yourself." Su Fengnian said, "I may not climb the mountain in the future." Li Yufu whispered, "I will go down the mountain often." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "In the future, that child should be beaten. Who told him to kidnap my sister without telling me in his last life? He still owes me." Li Yufu smiled and didn't say anything. Su Fengnian didn't rush down the mountain. Instead, he stayed at the top of Small Lotus Peak. Lu Qingyan sat with him at the turtle-carrying tablet for a while and then went to sleep. When she woke up the next day, she didn't know if she had a dream. She seemed to have seen a scene in a daze last night, but she couldn't be sure. After she opened her eyes, she saw Su Fengnian sitting by the bed. The latter smiled warmly but didn't give an answer. That night, a father and son stood side by side. The old man folded his hands in his sleeves and his back was slightly hunched. The old man looked at the territory of Biyao. The young man smiled and said, "Father, I just know that without you, there are no tigers in the mountains." The old man just gave an irrelevant answer, "If you can't bear it, don't force it. I only said half a sentence before. There's no reason that no son can't die. The second half is true, but there's also no reason that no son must die." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "I'm the king of Biyao. I'm not guarding the country for the emperor of Zhao, nor am I guarding the northwest for the people of the central plains. Father, you also said that where mother was in the past was where Su Zhao's home was. Later, where our children were, was where your home was. So to me, Su Fengnian, where my parents' graves are, is where my home is. I'm afraid of death, but if there's a day when I die, I'm not afraid of dying in Biyao." The old man pointed to the distance and laughed loudly, "This is a great place. I, Su Zhao, led the cavalry under my command and trampled all over the 9 countries of spring and autumn. Xiaonian, will you go to Beimang for me one last time?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Okay." Chapter 1347. On the Lantern Festival of the second year of Jianghu, Biyao Province, Chang'an City, the provincial city of Yuzhou. The lanterns were lit, and the fireworks were dazzling. Among them was a middle-aged man in a Confucian robe who was enjoying the scenery with his family. Although he was not eye-catching in the officialdom of Yuzhou Province, he was only a secondary Class 5 civil official. There were so many generals in Yuzhou Province. Tang Wenjin was just an assistant official from a poor family. His superior official, Hong Xinjia, was able to enter the field of vision of the central government of Liang Province, especially the Ministry of War, because of Gu Jintang's favor. However, perhaps not many people in Yuzhou Province had heard of Tang Wenjin's name. Nevertheless, Tang Wenjin's significance to Yuzhou Province, especially the military significance of the frontier line, could not be underestimated. Tang Wenjin had made a great contribution to the Wudong system, which was said to be capable of killing 160,000 northern barbarians. It was Tang Wenjin who had followed Hong Xinjia step by step across the gourd mouth and participated in the whole process, from the drawing of the geomancy map, the selection of the Wudong system, and the excavation of the ground. It could even be said that Tang Wenjin had the most meticulous and perfect military map in his mind. Once the war broke out in Yuzhou Province, if Hong Xinjia and Tang Wenjin were not at the gourd mouth, the effect of the Wudong system would be greatly reduced. Being exposed to the wind and the sun all year round, this civil official, who had a good reputation, had a dark complexion. His beautiful and fair-skinned wife, who was from Yanji County, made Tang Wenjin look like a big piece of charcoal. This time, Tang Wenjin returned to Chang'an City from the border to report the detailed military situation to the general of Yuzhou, Huang Fucheng. The reason why he enjoyed the lanterns with his wife and son on the Lantern Festival was not because he was bored, but because Tang Wenjin felt that if he missed this family reunion, he would be separated forever. Although Tang Wenjin was a civil official, most of the civil officials in Biyao could ride and shoot the enemy. Since ancient times, Yanji County had been rich in beauties. In the unofficial history, there was a saying that the common people still took delight in talking about. It was precisely because of a foxy woman from Yanji County that caused the great Qin dynasty to perish for 2 generations. Therefore, the people of Biyao had a humorous saying: if you marry a wife, you should marry a daughter from a rich family in Lingzhou, and if you marry a concubine, you should marry an aunt from Yanji County. Tang Wenjin married a woman from Yanji County, but he did not take any concubines. For many years, they lived in harmony. The only flaw was that they gave birth to 2 daughters, but they did not have a son. However, Tang Wenjin did not feel any regret. He doted on his 2 daughters very much. On the other hand, his wife always felt that she had let down the Tang family. Tang Wenjin often joked and comforted her, saying that the Wubao beacons at the mouth of the gourd were his sons. If it was not easy for parents to raise their children with a handful of shit and a handful of urine, then Tang Wenjin, who was in charge of trivial matters, could indeed be called the biological parents at the mouth of the gourd. Tang Wenjin had some solid martial arts skills, so it would not be difficult for her to kill 3 or 4 northern barbarians. Moreover, it would only be meaningful if there were many skills in the army that could be used in a battle formation. Naturally, it would not be enough to deal with the top experts of the Jianghu. Tang Wenjin was a scholar in her bones, and she had never planned to play catch and kill with any experts in this life. Therefore, Tang Wenjin did not know that in the crowded crowd, there were no less than 10 pairs of eyes paying attention to him. Those gazes were all like dragonflies skimming the surface of the water. They were experienced and were not even enough to make Tang Wenjin have some kind of intuition. At most, he only misunderstood them as lechers who were drooling over the wife beside him. Tang Wenjin and his wife each held the small hands of their daughters. It was inevitable that he was a little absent-minded because his mind was on the mouth of the gourd. He was thinking about which Wu castle needed to be strengthened, which beacon needed more manpower, which post road and which pass needed to be assigned scouts. In the army of Biyao, young civil officials such as Hong Xinjia and Tang Wenjin, as well as the new Honglu general Cao Xiaojiao, were forcibly classified into the Chen faction. Besides being in their prime years, these border officials were more or less influenced by the former governor of Biyao, Chen Jibao. They believed that details would determine the war situation. Therefore, they had a lot of differences with the veteran generals such as Yan Wenluan and Chen Yinshui. When the king of Biyao changed, many people were afraid that they would be suppressed and purged. Thankfully, Su Fengnian did not touch the bottom line of these hardcore people after he took the throne. On the contrary, many of these hardcore people were promoted more or less. Undoubtedly, Qiao Xiaojiao, the #1 troublemaker in Yuzhou province, was a typical example. They also reciprocated the tacit consent of Su Fengnian and the specific implementation of the policy of pacifying the border army and mobilizing the provincial army, which was carried out by Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang. Tang Wenjin had no impression of the king of Biyao. He did not admire or dislike him. As long as he did not come to the defense line at the mouth of the gourd, Tang Wenjin would continue to work for him without complaint. Tang Wenjin suddenly smiled and felt a little proud. It was true that the mouth of the gourd had consumed a huge amount of Biyao's provisions, but he and General Hong were using those stones to exchange for the lives of the Biyao barbarians. It was a good deal for Biyao. The late emperor of Liang, Zhao Dun, was an open-minded ruler. Although he and the empress lived a simple life, they did not forbid women from wearing makeup. Biyao was far away from the emperor, so they did not know what it meant to overstep their authority. Although the people were poor, their families were not poor. Every festive season, rich and powerful women would compete with each other for beauty. As long as they had money and dared to wear it, they would not be restrained even if they wore phoenix coronets and robes. At this time, in the crowd, there was a young woman who imitated the heavenly treasure makeup style of the old southern Tang imperial women. She had a graceful figure and a personal maidservant who combed her hair into a bun. One of the two women was plump and the other was slender. They complemented each other very well and were very eye-catching. Many idlers who liked to wait for an opportunity to take advantage of them swarmed over. In order to block the disaster for her mistress, the maidservant had already dropped several of the exquisite little combs made of gold, silver, and jade. However, it was still impossible to guard against them. The young woman's delicate buttocks still could not escape from the disaster. She was gently patted by a nimble skinny monkey with a mouth full of yellow teeth. Obviously, he was a veteran. The young woman was so frightened that her face turned pale and she hurriedly ran away. This scene happened to fall into the eyes of Tang Wenjin's wife. In addition to sympathy and annoyance, she also had a hint of jealousy and ridicule. She whispered to her husband, wearing such gaudy clothes and without the protection of a strong servant, "Isn't she just attracting bees and butterflies? Who's to blame?" Tang Wenjin did not care about these trivial matters. He nodded carelessly and had no intention of being a hero and saving the beauty. Cold women's temperaments were mostly unyielding and valiant. They were not inferior to men. Don't be fooled by their appearance of being gentle and timid. If they were really angry, they would definitely roll up their sleeves and fight fiercely, scratching other people's faces until they bled. Wasn't the wife next to Tang Wenjin the same one who, after marrying from a small place in Yanji County to the provincial capital, rewarded the prodigal with a ruthless kick to the groin when she participated in the lantern market for the first time? Not far away, a tall old man with a felt hat on his head threw a string of copper coins as a reward to the dwarf who was performing a fire-spitting performance. At the same time, in the sea of people, there was a traveling monk who was becoming more and more common in Biyao. He carried a bamboo rack with scriptures on his back. There was a young couple dressed in coarse linen. They were buying a stick of candied haws for their child from the man selling them. In the northeast corner of the downtown, there was a prosperous Dongfu temple. From the top of the bell tower, one could overlook half of the market. There were young masters and beautiful women in luxurious clothes talking and laughing. There were poor scholars scratching their ears and cheeks, trying to recite something. There were old men in their twilight years muttering to themselves. In the corridor outside the attic, a short Taoist holding a horsetail fly whisk glanced at the scenery where Tang Wenjin was standing. Then he took out a small booklet from his chest and dipped his finger in his saliva. He opened the booklet and saw the name Tang Wenjin in the light that was almost as bright as day. He chuckled softly and said, "Wenjin, what a great name. I heard that in the imperial court of the Central Plains, only a rare court official could receive such a title after death. Boy, you should take it easy in your next life." Just as the Taoist finished his soliloquy, a series of imperceptible changes took place in the downtown area. The girl from the Heavenly Treasure makeup, who was molested by the skinny monkey, lowered her head and ran a few steps away from Tang Wenjin. She twisted her waist. Even though she was in a difficult situation, she still had a natural charm. At some point in time, the servant girl in the bun had taken a small silver hairpin from her head. She should have flicked her wrist and flicked it upwards, but when her young miss twisted her waist to the left, the silver hairpin brushed against the right side of her waist and accurately pierced towards Tang Wenjin's heart. But at this moment, her wrist was tightly grasped by the skinny monkey who looked no different from an ordinary ruffian. The servant girl pretended to be panicked and turned her left elbow, trying to hit the temple of the man who was trying to stop her. But in an instant, her body went limp. After the skinny monkey, who looked only obscene, held the servant girl's wrist with one hand and suddenly exerted force with the other hand, which was only a foot away from the girl's back. It was the mountain-splitting punch, which was Lu's specialty in the external martial arts school of Biyao. This punch directly broke the delicate girl's spine. Then he carried the servant girl on his shoulder and shouted loudly that he was going to marry a wife and go home. He ran all the way, which made the people around laugh. They thought that this was a guy who dared to molest a girl in the street. He would have to eat in the state prison after this. Chapter 1348. The skinny monkey-like man who was running with the woman on his shoulder had an obscene smile on his face, but his eyes were actually very deep. As a direct descendant of the Lu family, the first in external martial arts, in Biyao, although his name did not appear in the genealogy of the Lu family, his skills and temperament were naturally the best. In fact, he was an A-class master of the whisk room who had been lurking in Chang'an City in Yuzhou province for many years. At the age of 20, he was already a level 3 master of both internal and external martial arts. The maid he killed was not simple either. She was a butterfly catcher from the spiderweb room in Beimang. After the successful strike, the skinny monkey-like man did not make any unnecessary movements and directly withdrew from this unconventional battlefield. He clearly remembered that when he first joined the whisk room, the senior who led the way only taught him a seemingly simple truth: there was a fine line between killing and being killed. After saying this, the senior smilingly asked him if he understood. Before the skinny monkey-like man nodded, he was sent flying backward. After lying on the bed for 2 months, he could finally get up and walk. After that, he understood a little. In the whisk room, which was built by Chu Lushan, rules were the most important. When and where to kill, what method to use to kill, when and where to withdraw. If there was an accident, someone else would secretly remedy it. No one was allowed to act on their own. The most taboo in the whisk room was to be self-righteous. If anyone dared to break the rules, Chu Lushan, the team leader, had a variety of rules to teach people. Therefore, for so many years, the assassination of the whisk room spies and men of sacrifice was very clean from the beginning to the end. Over time, there were very few accidents. After seeing the butterfly catcher being carried away, the old man in the felt hat who had thrown a string of copper coins to the vaudeville dwarf blocked in front of the man and woman in linen clothes, preventing them from getting closer to Tang Wenjin and her husband. The old man greeted them with a smile as if he had met a longtime friend of his. In an instant, he exchanged 6 moves with the young man. Finally, the old man with a kind smile put his arm around the young man's shoulder and stabbed a poison dagger into the waist of the Beimang catcher. What's more, the dagger was quickly pulled out and stabbed again. The young woman who had disguised herself as the butterfly catcher looked at all of this as usual. Even when the old man in the felt hat supported her husband and quickly moved away from her, she did not move. However, the corners of her mouth were slightly raised. When the old man in the felt hat realized that something was wrong, his head seemed to have been hit violently and he leaned back. The old man with blood oozing out of his forehead saw a young child standing not far away. The child, who looked innocent, tilted his head and gently spat out the second hawthorn seed. Then, the old man in the felt hat, whose vision was blurred, laughed. The butterfly catcher hurriedly squeezed into the crowd and disappeared in an instant. However, the child, whose real age could not be guessed, was left behind forever. There was a wooden stick that was originally used to skewer the candied hawthorn on his forehead. The honest old man who was selling candied hawthorns on the street picked up the child and quickly walked to the old man in the mink hat who was about to fall back. He inserted the stick that was full of candied hawthorns into the ground and freed one hand to support his old friend and the dead catcher. The old man in the felt hat was speechless. He looked at his old friend who had quarreled with him for half of his life. His lips trembled, but he could not say anything. The latter's eyes were red. He first wiped the blood on his old friend's forehead and then pulled his old friend's felt hat to cover his forehead. He said softly and hoarsely, "Lao Rong, when the Qingming festival comes back, I'll definitely bring you a pot of good wine that Master Chu gave me last year. Don't worry." The old man in the felt hat leaned back against the stick and slowly closed his eyes. A dozen or so steps to Tang Wenjin's right, a Wudong courtyard's eagle soldier and a northern Mang dragonfly catcher perished together, both of them using the dagger in their sleeves to kill each other. The two of them sat side by side on the ground, as if they were good brothers who held each other's arms after getting drunk. The young woman in the makeup that day was indifferent to the changes around her. Her only target was Tang Wenjin. The spider web that Li Mibi painstakingly managed had a pair of cocoons, 6 pole lifters, 300 catchers, and 80 butterfly catchers. She was the best among the butterfly catchers. She even had the chance to become the first female pole lift in Beimang. The premise was that she had to kill Tang Wenjin tonight. The 16 Yuzhou officials that she had killed before could not be compared to Tang Wenjin. Therefore, the death of those butterfly catchers was worth it. One step. She was only one step away from Tang Wenjin, who was still in the dark. Suddenly, the inconspicuous young woman beside Tang Wenjin bumped into her arms. In the corridor outside the clock tower, a burly young man with a sword appeared beside the short Taoist. He leaned his body and put his elbow on the railing. He narrowed his eyes and watched the hidden battle in the downtown area. He curled his lips and said, "What a waste of effort." The old Taoist withdrew his gaze. He seemed to be unwilling, but he still put away the booklet. He put the fly whisk on his arm and said flatly in the Liang official language, "If you want to blame someone, blame your spider web for the wrong information. You couldn't even find out that Tang Wenjin's wife was a spy for Biyao." The young man with a sword had a much more pleasant Liang accent. He sounded exactly like a Central Plains person. He said casually, "I'm just a pole lift who does the dirty work. I'm not an immortal. To be honest, you, the great immortal of the Daoist sect, are the ones who are called immortals." The old Taoist did not get angry. There were 135 targets in the booklet. So far, only 37 people have been killed. Not to mention the Jianghu men of sacrifice of our dynasty and the scouts and riders of Biyao, 1 pole lift, 12 butterfly catchers, and 31 catchers have died in your spider web. Isn't the loss outweighed the gain? The pole lift of Beimang did not speak. The great immortal of the Daoist sect frowned. "We don't have any backup for this trip to Chongqing City. Do you want to join hands with me to kill the heavily guarded Yuzhou General Huang Fujin?" The young swordsman with old age spots on the back of his hands sneered. "Apart from you, Cui Wazi of the Daoist sect, who came with me to watch the show, the yin yang face in the princess's tomb, the great music house of the chess and sword music school, and the 2 on the devil's master ranking didn't show up. Aren't you curious where they are? Why did the 5 of you only make a few moves along the way? It's not like Biyao didn't send anyone to guard the front line of the Calabash Cave. Half of the Tide Listening Pavilion's experts are hiding there, waiting for an opportunity." The immortals of the Daoist sect were good at cultivation, but they were not enlightened when it came to these dirty tricks. Cui Wazi was famous outside the Daoist sect, but his reputation in the sect was average. His talent was average. Not to mention the immortal Yuan Qingshan, who had already attained Dao and ascended, he could not even be compared to the senior brother who had been sleeping in a small building in Shijing with the flood dragon and the vat for 20 years. However, the Empress had assigned tasks to all the major sects, so the Daoist sect had no choice but to push him, the great immortal of the Daoist sect. Cui Wazi also knew his own limits. Even though this spiderweb lifting pole beside him had not reached the finger Xian realm, and he was not even sure if he had reached the Vajra realm, but if the 2 of them were to really go all out in a fight, the one to die would definitely be him, a genuine Daoist finger xian expert. Therefore, among the 5 first pin experts of Jianghu, the other 4 obviously looked down on Cui Wazi. He had no choice but to be an accountant. The old immortal asked tentatively, could it be that State Preceptor Li was targeting Huang Fujin from the beginning? The old man quickly added, or the more prestigious Yuzhou provincial governor Hu Kuei in the Biyao frontier army? The spiderweb bandit, who was skilled in disguise, could not help but roll his eyes. Playing the lute to a cow. Chapter 1349. Cui Wazi clenched the handle of the fly brush and said gloomily, I respect Master Li, not you. Don't push your luck. However, the sword did not pay any attention to this virtuous and respected enlightened master of law. Instead, it turned around and stared fixedly at a weak and delicate woman who had previously accompanied a certain silk-clothed young master in a show of cultured elegance. In the general's mansion in Yuzhou, Huang Fujin, dressed in official robes, sat on a red sandalwood chair. In the hall stood an old swordsman who was resting with his eyes closed. He was carrying a heavy sword case. He was the master of the profound finger technique, Mifengjie, who had been recruited by the king of Biyao himself. Compared to Cui Wazi, who practiced the profound finger technique on the bell tower, Michigan Fengjie's profound finger technique was based on the sword. Huang Fujin knocked on the table with one hand and held a teacup lid with the other. He gently fanned the steam rising from the tea in the cup. This powerful general had a mixed reputation in Biyao, but no one could deny that he was the king of Biyao's favorite. In Yuzhou, he was probably the only one who could bear the title of trusted subordinate. Huang Fujin could drink, but he did not like to drink. When he drank tea, he only drank strong tea that was so bitter that it made one's mouth feel bitter. Huang Fujin was silent. According to the intelligence reports from Wutongan and Fushui, Beimang's network and Jianghu forces had infiltrated the hinterland of Yuzhou. Although they had spread out in all directions in the beginning, the Eagle Guard and Peregrine Falcons in the dark and the local garrisons on the surface had been exhausted and suffered heavy casualties. Later on, these desperados had chosen a central route to the south. Then, under the cover of large-scale assassinations on the left and right, they had gone straight to Yuzhou's capital, Chang'an City. The target of the assassination was obvious. It was either him, the general of Yuzhou, or Governor Hu Kuei. In Chang'an City, in addition to Mifengjie, who had a hidden identity, there were also many second-level supreme power masters in Governor Hu's mansion to protect Hu Kuei. There was also that crazy woman, Fan Shaochai, who was hiding in the city. It seemed reasonable for Beimang to attack Chang'an City, which was heavily guarded but had plenty of bait. After all, the life and death of Huang Fujin and Hu Kuei could affect the situation in Yuzhou province. Huang Fushi suddenly covered the teacup and said in a low voice, "That's not right." At the same time, on the outside corridor of the clock tower, Beimang, who realized that his identity had been exposed, lifted the pole and jumped without hesitation, leaving the Immortal of Morality sect to deal with the dangerous woman who had hidden herself deeply. He laughed and said, "Cui Wazi, it's time for you to sacrifice your life for the country. When we successfully kill Yan Wenluan, I will personally send the compensation to the Daoist sect." General Yan Wenluan's tent was not in the hinterland of Yuzhou. It was only 150 miles away from the mouth of the gourd. At first, when the Yuzhou border army heard that a large number of Beimang assassins had infiltrated, they sent out 20 scouts of each group of 50 people. Great Ancestor Gu was different from Qin Yinshui, who was stationed in Yuzhou. Great Ancestor Gu was in charge of the situation at the border of Liangzhou province. Because he was worried about the safety of the commander, he even asked Zhou Kong, the deputy commander of the cavalry army, to send the most elite crossbowmen to the old general's tent. He completely ignored Yan Wenluan's objection and sent them to the old general's tent in case of any accidents. As the spy reports were sent, it showed that the Beimang assassins kept coming south. Especially the tent of the deputy commander of the infantry army, Qin Yinshui, was attacked at night. The Yuzhou army suffered heavy casualties. If it were not for the fact that there were enough third-level masters and masters in the ambush, the consequences would be unimaginable. Although the alert of Yan Wenluan's tent did not weaken, everyone was obviously relieved. This day just happened to be the time when the northern Mang cavalry crazily poured in from the other side of the gorge, the smoke of war rising from all directions. Yan Wenluan led 1,000 cavalry to rush to the front lines. Around the 1,000 cavalry, the crossbowmen on the 3 white horses and the first-rate scouts of the Yuzhou infantry were carefully and skillfully scouting. The more they did so, the more uneasy Yan Wenluan's guard commander felt when the 10 of them blocked the path of the 1,000 cavalry. At the end of the road, the person in the lead was a woman whose face was covered by a white veil. Beside her was a middle-aged scholar with thin eyes and a long beard. He had a Xiaoyao bandana on his head and a dark purple bamboo flute at his waist. They were the Princess Tomb and Little Thoughts. Chess and Sword Music School, Great Music House. Behind the 2 of them were 2 of the 10 giants of the Beimang Demon Path. A dwarf sat on the shoulder of a giant. It was a weird scene. The Beimang Jianghu only knew their nicknames, Iron Horseman and Thirsty Horseman. The latter was especially notorious. Just like the demon Xiaoling who liked to eat people's hearts and livers, they liked to drink the blood of living people. In the most unsociable position at the back, a white-haired old woman was coughing heavily. She had a delicate and beautiful flower on her head. The other 5 were all outstanding first-rate experts of the Beimang Jianghu. Yan Wenluan raised her arm and the 1,000 cavalry suddenly stopped. The old general chuckled and said, "This time, the northern barbarians have quite the appetite." The cavalry commander of the personal army was deeply worried. He urged his horse to Yan Wenluan's side. But before he could speak, Yan Wenluan laughed and said, "Don't worry. There's nothing for us to do today. Just enjoy it. In the end, there's still the existence of 10,000 enemies in the world. We generals who rely on the strength of our soldiers and horses have no choice but to accept it." In the cavalry commander's confusion, one of the cavalry silently stepped out of the formation. A man holding a long spear took off his helmet. This man, who was hailed by the world's famous general, Yan Wenluan, as the enemy of 10,000 enemies, slowly urged his horse forward. Many years ago, during the era when the sword god, Li Chungang, was the champion of the Jianghu, there was a man from Biyao. 1 man, 1 horse, and 1 spear, he was unstoppable on the Beimang grasslands. His name was the spear immortal, Wang Xiu. After that, the world only knew that Wang Xiu taught a disciple who surpassed his master, the white-robed Chen Jibao. But even the people of Biyao, and even the king of Biyao, Su Fengnian, did not know the reason why Chen Jibao was unable to take away the famous spear, after killing his master, Wang Xiu. It was because someone used an ordinary wooden spear to block Chen Jibao, who was wielding the plum ziqing. Looking at the seemingly ordinary cavalry charging with a spear, the leader of the great music house sighed helplessly. "It's Su Yanbing. Our previous plan has become a joke." A gust of wind blew past him and the princess. The great music house felt even more helpless. "You're courting death." The burly steel horseman galloped past them like lightning, and the dwarf laughed cruelly. When the distance between the 2 parties was about 50 steps, Thirsty kicked the giant's shoulders with both legs and used the momentum to leap forward. The thin and small figure's trajectory in the air was very ghostly and gaudy. In the end, it only brushed past him. The 1,000 cavalry behind Yan Wenluan did not see how the spear-wielding man attacked. They only saw the devilish dwarf explode into a cloud of blood in the air, and then the burly giant turned around and fled with all his might. They still did not see how the spear-wielding man on the horse moved his spear, but the enemy did not dare to run in a straight line. They circled back and forth, battered and exhausted. The next scene was even more inconceivable. The Beimang demon nicknamed Steel Horseman seemed to have been forced into a desperate situation for no reason. He turned around again and charged toward the horse. In the end, like an idiot committing suicide, he crashed into the tip of the spear, allowing the spear to pierce through his head. Su Yanbing flicked his wrist lightly and flung the giant corpse away. He continued to charge. It was not that Thirsty and Steel Horseman were too weak to withstand a single blow, but that the opponent they chose to attack with his spear had no chance of survival. In the past, when Wang Xiu, one of the 4 great grandmasters, fought against others, even if many of his opponents were on the same level as him, there were still very few who could withstand a single blow from him. Su Yanbing had already surpassed Wang Xiu's peak state by a lot. This was even more so. This meant that the battle between Su Yanbing and Chen Jibao in the future was destined to be a matter of a single spear. Chapter 1350. After the new Jinshi and Liang, they were often not immediately appointed to an official post. Before they were officially promoted to an official post, they were sent to the 6 ministries and 9 ministers to practice their political affairs. This was the so-called Jinshi system. After the new emperor ascended the throne, he went one step further on the basis of the assistant minister of the Ministry of War to patrol the borders established by the previous emperor himself. He created the precedent of the Ministry of War officials observing the borders. This was originally one of the proposals of the king of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, in the past. The purpose was to prevent the Ministry of War from only thinking about military affairs on paper and not being practical. It could be seen that the current emperor of the Zhao family was especially fond of this young vassal king, who was loyal and devoted during the Jingnan crisis. This time, the Ministry of War was leaving the borders of the capital, which attracted the attention of the whole court. The ranks of the officials of the Ministry of War were not high. Among them, the assistant minister of the carriage department, Kang Zhenrong, the manager of the military selection department, Gao Tingshu, and the others, and the manager of the military storage department, Yan Qiji. In the capital's officialdom, they were all typical, hairless, young faces. There were 2 reasons why the big shots in the imperial court paid attention to them. The first reason was that the first choice for observing the borders was not the expected 2 Liao provinces, where the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong, was already coordinating with the Eastern Front. It was the northwestern frontier fortress of the Great Desert Smoke, Biyao Road. The second reason was that the officials carefully selected by the Ministry of War were extremely thought-provoking. Among them, Gao Tingshu, the new second place, and Wu Zongxian, the same year in the officialdom, were able to rise to fame in Tai and city. Obviously, it was not enough to rely on their first or third place status. If it were not for Jin Sanlang, who spared no effort to add fuel to the fire, they would have been eclipsed by the government observation in 2 or 3 months at most. In the Zhao family Yamen, where there were many high-ranking officials, the Yonghui era had lasted for more than 20 years, so there was no shortage of Zhuangyuan, and Tanhua. As for the Jinshi, there were even more. Who in the world did not know that Jin Lanting, who had helped Gao Tingshu and helped him, had regarded the Biyao Su family as enemies? In addition, Yan Qiji and Kang Zhenrong's accompanying patrol was even more interesting. The Yan family entered the capital because of a woman, and Yan Jieshi and Yan Qiji became relatives of the emperor. What was even more unexpected was that the 4th prince, who had no ambition, could easily break the unshakable shackles of the imperial family's inheritance by not fighting for power. In the end, he smoothly became the emperor in the south. The emperor's father-in-law, Yan Jieshi, was previously a scholar of the Dongyuan Pavilion. Yan Qiji, who was often teased and bullied by the playboys of Tai and city when he first entered the capital, had now become the emperor's uncle. Who did not know that the emperor not only had a deep relationship with the empress, but also had a close relationship with this gentle and elegant brother-in-law before he ascended the throne. Otherwise, how could Yan Qiji, who was also a Jinshi, become the head of the armory department of the Ministry of War? How could he be personally escorted by the assistant minister of the Ministry of Appointments and even have Minister Liu of the Ministry of War personally greet him? Kang Zhenrong was also born in Biyao. His father, Kang Dai, had entered the capital to become an official and joined the second prince's tutelage. Kang Wuqi and Yan Qiji were brothers who could wear the same pants as the king of Biyao when they were young. Adding on Li Hanlin, the only one left in Biyao, the 4 of them had visited at least 70 or 80 brothels together in Biyao, if not 100. Thus, there was a lot to chew on. Of the 4 brothers, not to mention Su Fengnian, the hereditary king of the border, even if Li Hanlin had a father who was a second-level official in Liang, what position was he in now? He was just a small crossbow bolt. Moreover, Li Gongda, who was widely recognized as a skilled official, had only been a governor for a few days. His butt had not even warmed the chair before he was quickly pushed aside by an outsider like Song Dongming. On the contrary, in the capital, not to mention Yan Qiji, who had an extraordinary status, Kong Zhenrong was already a powerful figure in the Ministry of War. If they were in any other province, even an old county governor would have to address Kong Zhenrong as his brother and treat him with great care. Perhaps, the latter would not be willing to accept it. Not long after they entered the border, they received the shocking news that the Beimang army was advancing on 3 fronts. The old men of the Ministry of War intended to take a detour around the relatively peaceful border of Yuzhou as an explanation to the imperial court. After that, they would immediately set off for Ji Bei to greet Yuan Tingshan, who had recently risen to power. After that, they would go to Liao province and meet with Gu Jiantang and the right assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong. It was supposed to be a safe and peaceful journey. However, they did not expect that they would encounter such a tricky situation as soon as they entered the eastern part of Yuzhou. Who knew if that northwest barbarian surnamed Su would feel that he had been disgraced by the imperial court and become so bold that he would order the Beiliang frontier army to disguise themselves as Beimang cavalry and wipe out all the officials of the Ministry of War. Among the officials of the Ministry of War, a few old men who had witnessed the dangers of the officialdom hurriedly stopped at a courier station at the border. They discussed for the entire night but still failed to come up with a perfect plan. However, the young and vigorous Gao Tingshu did not agree with them. Not only did he propose to go straight to the calabash mouth of Yuzhou, but he also proposed to take a look at Huda City, which was the most impregnable pass in the northwest of Liangzhou province. The old men, who were already afraid of the cold, were so scared that their lips turned purple. If not for the fact that the bannerman was a junior in the officialdom who had a good impression on both Gu Jiantang and Minister Lu, he would have been kicked out of the Ministry of War by the time he returned to the capital. Compared to Gao Tingshu, who was like a newborn calf that was not afraid of tigers, Yan Qiji, who had been gentle and courteous along the way, was much more amiable in the eyes of those old foxes in the officialdom. After a torturous night at the courier station, they did not know how many times they had picked the wick. In the end, it was Yan Qiji who came up with an idea that made the old men feel more and more appropriate the more they thought about it. The imperial uncle proposed not to go to Yuzhou province or the northern line of Liangzhou province, but to go directly to Beiliang Palace and Mount Qingliang. Liang Shihu, who was in charge of the specific affairs of the department for purging officials, stroked his beard and made up his mind. He squinted his eyes and smiled as he said, "Good." Official Liang found this young imperial uncle more and more pleasing to the eye. Going to Mount Qingliang, which was famous throughout the world, was a good idea. No matter how unruly the king of Beiliang was, even if he had dared to send troops to resist an imperial edict, he would not be so daring as to kill someone in his own palace, right? Besides, with the friendship that Yan Qiji and Kong Zhenrong had built up with the king of Beiliang, even if there was not much left, going to Beiliang Palace would not be a hongmen banquet. Besides, who had not heard of the spectacular sight of tens of thousands of carps swimming in Tidehark Lake? There were so many officials in Grand Peace City, but how many of them had the opportunity to see it with their own eyes? After leaving the capital, Gao Tingshu, who appeared to be in high spirits, hesitated for a moment. In the end, he did not say anything that would offend the public. It seemed that Manager Yan's status as the imperial uncle was not something that he, the second-ranked scholar with an unstable foundation, could provoke. Chapter 1351. When the political observation team stopped at the relay station bordering Liangzhou to rest, Kong Zhenrong, who was returning to his hometown for the first time since he entered the capital, found Yan Qiji, who was reading Sages at night. He sat down and did not say anything. After a few years of polishing, Yan Qiji gradually lost the childishness of a foreigner entering the capital. Furthermore, he had a scholarly temperament. After the Yan family had a meteoric rise, this young scholar with a weak temperament had imperceptibly become more assertive. This made his father, who was the Grand Secretary of the Grand Hall, feel very gratified. Kong Zhenrong did not speak, and Yan Qiji did not take the initiative to speak either. There was only the sound of him flipping the book and the occasional sound of the lamp wick cracking in the room. In the end, it was Kong Wuqi who could not hold it in and asked in a low muffled voice, "Yan Qiji, do you think Brother Feng will be angry and refuse to see us?" Yan Qiji continued to read and seemed to be unsure. He said softly, "I don't think so." Kong Zhenrong, who had just shaved his beard this morning, touched his stubble and sighed sadly. You are lucky. You and Hanlon have been together with Brother Feng for a few more years. I ran to the capital a few years before you. The last time Brother Feng went to the capital, my father was muddle-headed and tricked me to go to the south of Jingji early. In the end, we did not meet. Yan Qiji, you read more books. Do you think Brother Feng will think I am not loyal? If I had known it would be such a depressing situation, would not have gone to the capital with my father even if I had run away from home. Yan Qiji did not flip the book again. He stopped at the page in his hand and was silent. Kong Zhenrong asked, why don't you go to the Ministry of Personnel or the Ministry of Rights? Why did you come to the Ministry of War? Didn't you hate war and bloodshed the most since you were young? Yan Qiji sighed. It is because I hate it that I want to go to the Ministry of War. Kong Zhenrong rolled his eyes. You scholars have a lot of tricks up your sleeves. You don't say it directly. Others take off their pants to fart, but you wear your pants to shit. Yan Qiji's eyes suddenly sharpened. He looked out of the window and whispered, when you go back, tell Uncle Kong to stop writing to King Tang of Gangnam-do. Seeing Kong Zhenrong's confused appearance, Yan Qiji almost squeezed out word by word. Especially the matter of King Tang sending people to the capital to present the auspicious white deer. Tell your father not to get involved. Kong Zhenrong wondered, isn't this a good thing? Yan Qiji sneered, you don't have to care about anything. You just need to tell your father that it was an unintentional remark I made after a family banquet. Your father knows the severity of the matter. Kong Zhenrong, who used to be Yan Qiji's shield, looked at Yan Qiji's face and said softly, eating chicken Yan, I don't think I know you. Yan Qiji's originally tense face softened a little. He picked up the book on the table again and said almost to himself, I didn't want to either. The following trip to Liangzhou made the hearts of the officials, including Liang Zhenrong of the Department for Purging Officials, slowly relax. Not only did the local armies of Liangzhou open the gates for them, there was also a newly appointed lieutenant who personally escorted them to the outskirts of Liangzhou city. Although there was a hint of surveillance, at least on the surface, it gave enough face to the Ministry of War's political observation this time. Liang Zhenrong did not have a military background, but as an old official of Jianghu of the Ministry of War, his vision was not bad. He could tell that Beiliang's local army was strong, far superior to the capital and Jizhou. Naturally, he began to feel fear of the Su family's 300,000-strong cavalry. He sighed with emotion. It turned out that Beiliang's light cavalry was already so majestic. When the group of officials, who were looked at like monkeys by the people of Liangzhou, arrived at the gate of the king's mansion at the foot of Mount Qingliang and saw the 2 stone lions that were as tall as 2 people, even the experienced and knowledgeable old men of the Ministry of War looked at each other and gasped. How majestic! Yan Qiji and Kong Zhenrong's expressions were complicated. Gao Tingshu snorted coldly, scaring Liang Zhenrong into coughing heavily, afraid that the people of Beiliang Palace would hear. In Liang, there had always been a saying that the local officials were 3 feet lower than the officials of the capital. This meant that the prestige of the officials of the capital was naturally 3 ranks higher than that of the local officials. Now, there was no need to mention the officials of the Ministry of Personnel who were arrogant towards the officials of the capital. Although the Ministry of War, which had lost its backbone, was beginning to be overshadowed by the Ministry of Personnel led by the new, heavenly official, of Liang, Yin Mao Chun, its prestige was still there. Liang Zhenrong was the chief official in charge of all the political plans in the world and a proud scholar. Therefore, when he led the way through the side gate of Beiliang Palace, he had the air of a capital official that swayed his sleeves as he walked. Even the steward of the king's mansion could not help but take a few more glances. The king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, did not appear from the beginning to the end. It was the deputy of Beiliang's Ministry of Economy, Song Dongming, who came out to greet the guests. He said that the king of Beiliang was in charge of military affairs at the border and could not leave. Liang Zhenrong and the other old foxes could not wait for the son of a butcher to ignore them. They said a bunch of flowery words that did not cost any money and praised the king of Beiliang for being so busy every day that he even had to go to the front lines to guard the northwestern border for the imperial court. Song Dongming, the self-appointed deputy of Beiliang's Ministry of Economy, smiled and accepted everything on behalf of the king of Beiliang. It was probably because the deputy had the aura of a famous scholar from the Central Plains that made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Liang Zhenrong and the others immediately felt a lot better. They also felt that it was a pity that Song Dongming was a bright pearl covered in dust. If he went to the imperial court in the capital and stood side by side with the officials of the imperial court, that would be a sight to behold. After Song Dongming held a welcoming dinner for the officials from the Ministry of War, unexpectedly he did not have any intention of fooling around. As soon as he put down the chopsticks on the table, he stood up and led everyone to his office on the mountainside of Mount Qingliang to take a seat. He took the initiative to talk about the Northern Liangdao military officer's appointment and the border army's promotion and change, including the sensitive and important military affairs. Observing politics from the Ministry of War was a bit like patrolling on behalf of the heavens, but Liang Shihu dared to think this way when he went to Jizhou. How could he dare to be so arrogant in Northern Liangdao? He had originally thought that they would be lucky if they could eat a few meals and drink a few pots of green ant wine. He had even prepared himself to be ignored. The elders, including Liang Zhenrong, insisted on only listening and not speaking. However, Gao Tingshu was not so particular. He asked many times about the distribution of troops in Beiliang and the specific military affairs at the border. Song Dongming did not show any displeasure and always found some excuse to skip the questions. Liang Zhenrong was originally happy that Gao Tingshu was the first to stick his head out. If he could really find out the truth, it would be a great contribution. However, after the young manager kept asking, Song Dongming narrowed his eyes and lowered his head to drink his tea. Liang Zhenrong could no longer sit still. He glanced at the door in fear, afraid that if the deputy threw his cup, 500 executioners would rush out and push them to the ground, chop them up, and feed them to the dogs. Liang Zhenrong hurriedly tried to smooth things over. He said that he had heard that the scenery of the Tidehark Lake was the best in the world and wanted to bring his colleagues to see it for themselves. Song Dongming did not stand up this time. He only smiled and let his subordinates lead the officials to Tidehark Lake. Song Dongming then went to the top of the mountain alone. He looked at Su Fengnian, who was travel-worn, and asked, "Since you're back, why don't you talk about the old days?" Su Fengnian shook his head. He looked at Tidehark Lake and said, "Sir Song, come with me to the back of the mountain. Let's go together and engrave the 296 names on the tombstone." Song Dongming nodded. The deputy of the administrator, who was walking with Su Fengnian to the back of the mountain, was obviously angry for a long time. Finally, he could not hold back his anger and said, "What a good saying. But what about the 296 people in Beiliang?" Su Fengnian said calmly, "Beiliang will remember it." Chapter 1352. Behind the mountain was a forest of steels. Stone steels were everywhere, and there were even more under construction. Most of them were still wordless, but there were already several hundred stone steels in the periphery that already had owners. They were all made from calligraphy pills, and they were all from the dragon elephant cavalry who had died in the battle in Liuzhou at the end of the auspicious year. There was an ancient saying that one would be thin if they used ink, and fat if they obtained vermilion. Therefore, calligraphy pills were best made with strength and hard bones. The people who had drawn these stone steels were two renowned Beiliang calligraphers. Because Mi Chang and Peng Henian lived in the north and south of Liangshan, there was a saying that, the south's muscle and the north's bone. Because of the conflict between the north and south, the two old calligraphers put on a stance that they would never interact with each other. Moreover, when great General Su Shao was still alive, they did not think much of Beiliang's military and political affairs. However, when the Beiliang palace announced that they were going to erect 300,000 stone steels, Mi Chang was the first to go to Mount Qingliang. He asked a few questions, and after getting the answers, he stayed there and then wrote a letter to Peng Henian. The general idea was, "Grandson Peng, do you dare to come face to face with your grandfather?" Afterwards, Peng Henian took the set of 4 treasures of the study that he regarded as his life and ran to the back of Mount Qingliang. He and Mi Chang built a hut and lived next to each other. The two old enemies actually became neighbors. Then, in the midst of the two old men sparring, or more accurately, quarreling with each other, the deputy administrator Song Dongming personally gave them a list. On the list were names and two simple things: when and where they were born, and when and where they died. At the beginning of the calligraphy pill, the two old men still had the intention of competing. Later, when Mi Chang wrote a name, he suddenly burst into tears. Lu Hongyi, a young man from Chunshui County in Lingzhou. When he was young, he relied on his family background and was unbearably naughty. This old man even scolded him for wasting that name. This child was only 21 years old, how could he die just like that? After that, Mi Chang Penghenian became more and more silent. Other than communicating with the stonemasons who were responsible for carving the words on the back of the book, he did not like to talk much. Today, when the Mi and Peng elders heard that someone had arrived at the steel forest, their hearts tightened. With complicated feelings, they took their luggage and ran over to take a look. To their surprise, it was the king of Biyao who had come in person. The two elders were not used to bowing to anyone, so their actions were very unfamiliar. Su Fengmian hurriedly helped the two elders up, but did not exchange any pleasantries. After a moment of hesitation, he divided the pile of paper into 4 portions, one for him and one for Song Dongming, and the other half for Mi and Peng, the 2 calligraphy grandmasters. The 4 silently began to write on the steel. Behind the 4 of them, there were 2 to 3 skilled craftsmen who had already prepared the tools and were waiting for the carving. In the evening, the sound of metal and stone clanging could be heard. Su Fengmian and Song Dongming finished half an hour earlier than the 2 old men. By the time they finished the last batch of rice, it was already dark. They didn't even have time to wipe their hands full of red rice. The old man walked to Su Fengmian's side with a tired look and asked in a deep voice, "Why are there wars everywhere in the hinterland of Yuzhou?" Su Fengmian said softly, "The spies of Beimang have infiltrated and are wantonly assassinating the officials of Yuzhou." Mi Chang directly pointed at Su Fengmian's nose, jumping up and down as he cursed. "Back then, when your father was still alive, Northern Mang also had assassins ambushing us. How could they have been stopped outside the pass? How did you become the king of Biyao? Aren't you the best ace in the world, Su Fengmian? Do you only know how to stare all day long? You watch people die in front of your eyes, and then you collect their corpses and pretend to write a few names?" Song Dongming was about to speak when Su Fengmian, wearing a thick fur coat, waved his hand and stopped the deputy administrator's explanation. He looked at the old man and said apologetically, "I didn't do a good job." Peng Henian's personality was not as impatient as Mi Chang's, but he was still angry. However, he still pulled on the latter's sleeve. When Su Fengmian had walked far away, the gloomy-faced Mi Chang spat heavily at the back of the figure. He threw the priceless green crab shell inkstone in his hand onto the ground and said, "I'm not writing anymore. I'm not staying in Biyao anymore. I'm going to Jiangnan. I'll write the word Su Fengmian is a bastard for as long as I can live in this life." Not long after, Song Dongming turned back and saw Mi Chang standing in the same place with his eyes closed. Peng Henian squatted on the ground and sighed. Neither of them picked up the inkstone. Song Dongming bent down to pick up the inkstone. He was not in a hurry to return it to its owner. He looked at the top of Mount Qingliang and said in a low voice, "The 2 of you probably haven't heard of Beimang's sword aura is close to Huangqing and who the founder of the chess and sword music school's bronze statue is. Neither of you have seen a real dragon. In fact, I, Song Dongming, have never seen one. But I know 2 things. First, Huangqing died in Liuzhou. The real dragon raised by Beimang is also gone. Along with it, hundreds of qi cultivators hiding in Beimang's Shijing are also dead. The second thing is that there are 2 tombstones here. They are almost engraved with 2 names. Coincidentally, both of them have the surnames Su Longxiang, and Su Fengmian." Song Dongming turned around and returned the ancient inkstone to Mi Chang. He smiled calmly and said, "If Beimang is really gone one day, Su Fengmian will definitely be included on the tombstone. Of course, I, Song Dongming, am an outsider. At that time, I hope that old me will be willing to write it." After saying that, Song Dongming slowly left. Peng Henian deliberately did not look at Mi Chang, whose face was flushed red. He counted with his fingers and seemed to be talking to himself. Su Fengnian is a bastard. Eh. That's not right, old me. You calculated wrongly. It's 9 words, not 8 words like you said. Mi Chang carefully kept the ancient inkstone. He rolled his eyes and said, Mi Chang is a bastard, okay? It's exactly 8 words. Peng Henian laughed out loud and said, sure, why not? Isn't your birthday in a few days? I'll write a piece of calligraphy for you. How about that? Mi Chang did not care about being polite. He flew into a rage out of humiliation and said, write your head. Chapter 1353. After that, the 2 old men did not immediately leave the steel forest. Like last time, they carefully examined the stonemason's carving to prevent any mistakes. Generally speaking, even for the book core, because the stonemasons who carved the book core were often very different in terms of calligraphy, there was often a situation where the book core was out of shape. Although Mi Chang and Peng Henian did not ask for too much, they still wanted to make it perfect. Perhaps the 2 old men felt that this was the only thing they could do well. However, the stonemasons' carving skills were satisfactory. Although they were not as good as the original, they were enough to express 50 to 60% of the original book core's charm. The stonemasons' meticulous carving was naturally much slower than their writing. Mi Chang carried a lantern and checked the steels one by one. Suddenly, he heard Peng Henian anxiously calling him over. Mi Chang thought that one of the stonemasons had made a mistake and ran over to take a look. He did not expect that Peng Henian was standing in front of a row of steels. There was no stonemasons working in front of the steels. He only saw old man Peng squatting in front of a steel with a lantern. He could not wait to stick his eyes on the steel as if he had discovered the book core. Mi Chang went over to take a look. It was the king of Biyao Su Fengnian's book core. At first glance, the meaning was not ordinary. However, in Mi Chang's opinion, although it was indeed superior, it was still far from being a celestial item. It was far from enough to make Peng Henian make a fuss. Peng Henian did not turn around. He stretched out his hand and touched the carving. Soon, he staggered backward and fell to the ground. His eyes were closed and tears flowed out of his eyes. He threw the lantern away and covered his face with his hands. His expression was extremely painful. He pointed at the steel and shouted, "Old me, come closer and look with your eyes wide open. But remember, don't look for too long. Remember." Mi Chang raised the lantern and looked carefully. He only felt a sharp chill in his face, making him feel as if he was in an abyss. Obviously, this was not because of the Su Fengnian's book core, but because of the finishing touch of the carving master. Mi Chang's eyes soon stung. He closed his eyes and shook his head hard. He murmured, "The beginning and the end are decisive, like the kundo cutting jade. How could this be carved by the best stonemason in the world in such a short period of time? This is truly a work of the gods." Peng Henian sat on the ground and rubbed his eyes. He sighed. Someone wrote it with their fingers. That's the only explanation. Mi Qian said incredulously, "Most martial arts grandmasters can make swords with their fingers, but there is no one in this world who can write such charm." Peng Henian smiled bitterly. Could it be a ghost? Mi Qiong stood up and looked at the night sky with the lantern in his hand. "I didn't believe in ghosts and gods before, but now I hope that ghosts and gods really do exist in this world and can bless us, Bailiang, and defeat Bei Mang." Peng Henian slapped his head. "Hurry and have someone tell His Highness about this. Don't complicate things." Su Fengnian quickly rushed over. Beside him were a man and a woman who carried the lantern. There was a great difference in age between them. One was Mi Fengjie, the master of the heavy sword cave, whose realm was still steadily rising. The other was Fan Shaochai, a loyalist of the northern Han nobility. The former had been guarding Huangfu Jin during the Battle of the Spies in Yuzhou and had not accomplished anything. However, Fan Shaochai had killed Cui Wazi, the Taoist priest of the Taoist sect, on a clock tower in Chang'an City. By the time the spies from Wutongan and Fushui went up to clean up the mess, the scene they saw was truly tragic. Minced meat was everywhere, and the walls were stained with blood. At the time, they saw Fan Shaochai sitting on the balcony railing, fiddling with the flybrush that had been left behind by a Xian finger expert. She did not seem like a powerful top-notch assassin, but rather like an innocent young girl. Su Fengnian squatted in front of a monolith. Beside him was a middle-aged man who was also the leader of Biyao Palace's guards. The latter was apprehensive as he reported, "We've found it. This stonemason is called Wu Jiang. He should be using an alias. He has been a third-rank servant for 16 years and 4 months. His nickname is Old Ginger, because the old man likes to eat ginger, regardless of whether he eats or drinks." Last year, when the monolith forest was recruiting craftsmen, Wu Jiang was transferred here from the prince's estate. His Highness, this subordinate was incompetent and did not recognize him well. "Please punish me." Su Fengnian shook his head. "It has nothing to do with you. There is no need to blame yourself." Su Fengnian slowly stood up. He turned to Mi Fengjie and asked, "How is it?" Mi Fengjie said in a low voice, "I only saw a word and a sword." The sword aura was unstoppable. Su Fengnian smiled. Wu Jiang, Wu Jiang. Wu, Jiang, Jiang family, is to chew without boundaries. Su Fengnian said softly, "This person has no ill intentions. You don't have to investigate this matter." Su Fengnian returned to Mount Qingliang and walked towards the mausoleum. His parents were sleeping there. After Su Zhao's death, Su Fengnian built a cenotaph for his master, Li Yishan. Su Fengnian walked into the mausoleum path alone and remembered many things. His master said that the words on tombstones were the saddest in the world because the epitaphs were all written by the living in the world of the living to the dead in the world of the dead. The deeper the feelings of the person who wrote it, the harder it was to write it, the more godly it was. According to his will, Li Yishan's ashes were scattered on the yellow sand of the northwest border. Originally, his master did not want a grave, but Su Fengnian still made a cenotaph on his own initiative. He did not write an epitaph, just like the monument forest behind Mount Qingliang. He only wrote his name and the time and place of his death. He believed that his master's spirit in heaven would not be too angry about this. Su Fengnian felt that Huang Longshi was dead. It was a strange feeling, but he did not doubt it. The 3 great devils of spring and autumn, Cat Man Han Xingxian, died in Su Fengnian's hands. Butcher Su Xiao was gone, and 3-inch tongue chaotic spring and autumn's Huang Longshan was also gone. The 3 were no longer in this world. Huang Longshi occupied the top 3 of the 13 ranks of spring and autumn. He boasted that he was first in 19 Dao, first in cursive script, and first in divination of yin and yang. Sword armor Li Chungang died. Soldier armor West Chu's War Saint Yi Baikue died in the Battle of the Western Fortress, which made Qinjibao. The peerless Sei Jia, the Empress of Chu, had also passed away. Zither armor, the blind zither player of the old southern Tang, drowned in the river with his zither after the fall of the country. Western Shu painting armor Zhou Yueying, before he died, he painted a long scroll of Shu's mountains and rivers. He lay on the scroll and died drunk. Earth armor Siddhi Shens, proficient in geomancy, looking for qi, pulse, and acupoints. After Li Yang unified the world, he was secretly sentenced to death. Dharma armor Sun Ping, cooked and eaten by the people. Daoist armor Qi Xuanjin died on the demon-slaying platform. Monk Shijia dragon tree died outside the Daoed sect in Beimang. Out of the 13 ranks of spring and autumn, 12 of them had already passed away. Only one unimportant Dao armor was left. It was likely that he had also died in obscurity due to the general trend of the world. In fact, ever since Gu Jiantang became recognized as the world's #1 saber master, this Dao armor, who had only appeared briefly in Jianghu and whose name was unknown, was mentioned less than Li Chungang, who had stayed under the Tide Listening Pavilion. When Li Chungang returned to being a sword immortal in the great snow plains of Mount Hui, he could not be compared at all. On a night in early spring, snowflakes floated down from the sky. The snowflakes seemed to be getting more and more intense. Su Fengnian could not help but stop and raise his head to catch the snowflakes. For some reason, Su Fengnian thought of White Fox's face and his or her two sabers, spring thunder embroidered winter. Su Fengnian still did not know who White Fox's face was. Was it really called Nangong Push? Why did she come to Biyao? Why did she insist on entering the Tide Listening Pavilion? Su Fengnian would leave for Yuzhou the next morning. The reason he did not meet Yan Qiji and Kong Zhenrong was not because he had a problem with them, but for their own good. But even if he was misunderstood, even if he did not meet them, Su Fengnian still rushed back to Mount Qingliang. This was what brothers were like. Su Fengnian only recognized 4 brothers in his life: Li Hanlin, Yan Qiji, Kong Wuqi, and Wen Hua. Suddenly, Su Fengnian, who was walking slowly in the wind and snow, saw a strange figure standing in front of the 2 tombstones with his back to him. This scene did not make sense, nor did it make sense. The Biyao Palace of today could be said to be heavily guarded, compared to the situation in which His Royal Highness had deliberately created a loose exterior and a tight interior in order to fish. Not to mention entering the forbidden area of the mausoleum. The figure turned around and said flatly, "Return on a snowy night." Chapter 1354. Su Fengnian did not know who the person on the stele was referring to, but with his excellent memory, he recognized the old man's identity at a glance. It was the old servant of Mount Qingliang who had temporarily become a stonemason, Wu Jiang, who loved eating ginger. When they first met, the old man was standing among the group of stonemasons. His figure was stooped, his face weathered, and he was not eye-catching. If Su Fengnian had not fallen so much, he might have been able to see some clues at that time. Su Fengnian did not retreat, but instead advanced slowly. Only then did he realize that the old man, who had straightened his back and did not pretend to shrink back, had an excellent bearing. He actually had the powerful aura of an elder in the palace hall. In Su Fengnian's impression, the older generation of masters who were pure Jianghu people, except for Han Xingxian and Sui Xiagu, were easily intimidating. At first glance, old Huang, the old man in the sheepskin coat, and the old Jinren of Mount Longhu, Zhao Shituan, were not even close to the high and mighty masters of the martial arts. This confirmed Su Fengnian's previous guess. Even if the old man, who used the pseudonym of Wu Jiang, was not the West Chu dynasty's master of calligraphy, Qi Lianhua, who was known as the second of the millennium ranking, he was still closely related to the master of calligraphy. It was not difficult for a person to hide one's inadequacies, but it was not easy to hide one's inadequacies in calligraphy. Qi Lianhua, who was born in a powerful family, was recognized as a master of calligraphy with extraordinary talent. However, in the Dechu dynasty, he was only an official in the Hanlin Academy. He only did small things like helping the emperor surnamed Jiang write articles on titles and inscriptions on steles. He edited half of the history books of the previous dynasty that died without any illness. Therefore, at that time, he was also nicknamed Qi Lianhua and Tianhua Lang. The latter implied that Qi Lianhua could only add flowers to brocade and not provide timely help. After the fall of West Chu, the Qi family of Guangling declined. Qi Lianhua's whereabouts were also unknown. Qi Lianhua was originally the West Chu's book armor, who was known for his semicursive script. As soon as his Warring State Style was published, it was praised as the world's second semicursive script. Later, Nailan Yusi, who was appointed by the Liang government as the double champion of spring and autumn calligraphy, had the world's first semicursive script, Xinguan style, to compete with him. However, the people of the world were not willing to accept this saying. They did not recognize Nailan Yusi as the double champion, and only recognized that Qi Lianhua's calligraphy attainment was close to that of the ancient sages. However, as for the spring and autumn book armor, it belonged to none other than Huang Longshi, who was known as the unrivaled champion in cursive script. Later on, Liang impatiently pushed out this old man of the Song family as the first champion of literature, but he was also sneered at by the people of the time. It was fine if this old man of the Song family was content to be the head of the literary world as a lackey of the Zhao family of Liang. However, with the Shangyin Academy's chancellor Qi Yang Longzhu in front of him, how could he be the first champion of literature for the spring and autumn book armor? The Liang imperial court was not satisfied. Although there was no first champion of literature, there was no second champion of martial arts. Therefore, they wanted to push Wang Xianji of the martial arts city as the first champion of literature. However, they were directly rejected by the self-proclaimed second in the world old monster Wang. As a result, there were many dazzling versions of the spring and autumn book armor. Among them, there was a certain number champion of the Taoist surnamed Zhao from Mount Longhu. However, the most widely circulated and most convincing version was still the earliest version. Although many people missed out on the spring and autumn book armor, no matter what, as long as they were nominated by others, they were naturally dragons and phoenixes among men. Su Fengnian's master, Li Shan, praised Qi Lianhua's calligraphy skills to the extreme. He said that the running script was worthy of being called the best in both ancient and modern times. Therefore, Su Fengnian was naturally implicated. When he practiced running script in his youth, he always copied the few authentic Qi pads that had been handed down for generations. He didn't know how many times he had scolded Qi Lianhua. Su Fengnian was very curious. If the old man in front of him was really Qi Lianhua, how did he become a West Chu loyalist who had slipped through the net of Mount Qingliang? In order to make the Biyao Palace, which was full of experts, misjudge him, it was not enough to rely on mere forbearance. It was necessary to have the support of terrifying strength. Su Fengnian was not surprised by the old man's hiding in the Su family. Jianghu was the only bloodline of the West Chu imperial family. Naturally, the West Chu scholars, who had been raised by the country for 200 years, would not be able to repay the kindness of the king even if they did not die. However, what really made Su Fengnian apprehensive was that the fact that the fallen princess Jiangxi had been brought back to Biyao by Su Shao was a huge secret. Otherwise, Chao Chongqing would not have secretly investigated the Liang court for so many years without any results. How did the old man in front of him know about this? Su Fengnian did not immediately retreat from this mausoleum. Instead, he looked into the eyes of a remnant of the old Chu. This was actually a very big risk. Although Su Shao had taken the liberty of leaving behind a precious, remnant evil, surnamed Jiang for West Chu, after all, Su Shao had personally taken down the western fortress. He had also personally led the troops to break down the main gate of West Chu's imperial palace. The emperor and empress had died right in front of Su Zhao's eyes. It could be said that Su Zhao's feelings toward West Chu could only be described as personal gratitude and national hatred. Moreover, the current Guangling road was filled with smoke, and the battle in Liang was not going well. In the eyes of the common people, even if the Biyao cavalry could not withstand the invasion of Beimang's million-strong army to the south, it was definitely more than enough for them to retreat out of the barren northwest and run to the central plains to clean up the West Chu rebel army. At present, from top to bottom, many people felt that this was undoubtedly the king of Biyao, Su Fengnian's choice of retreat. Leaving Liang would not result in the loss of a single soldier, and Biyao would also have enough military merit to arrange a retreat for its generals. Everyone was happy. As for the 300,000 border troops, at worst, they could just disband them. In any case, the Great Pillar State Gu Jintang's 2 Liao border troops could absorb more than 100,000 soldiers in one go. For this reason, the imperial court of West Chu paid close attention to the Biyao frontier army's movements, especially Su Fengnian's. They were afraid that the young vassal king would one day lose his mind and lead his army all the way to the central plains, using the Dechu as a proof of allegiance to the new ruler of Liang. At this moment, the only experts at Su Fengnian's side that could act were Mei Fengjie and Fan Shaochai, and they were both outside the mausoleum, forbidden from entering the forbidden grounds. The sword-eater ancestor, Sui Xiegu, and the Wu clan's 100 cavalry were on the northern front of Liangzhou, in case Beimang tried to assassinate Chu Lushan in the Biyao protectorate, regardless of the cost. Su Yanbing was still single-handedly pursuing that group of top-notch Beimang experts that had infiltrated Yuzhou. Tantai Pingjing and the disciples of the Guanyin sect were also working with Su Yanbing, determined to keep that little idea and the great Yu house in Yuzhou. In the past, where in the world would Su Fengnian not be able to go? The old man carefully sized up this somewhat absent-minded young man, a complicated look in his eyes. Perhaps his very existence made the surrounding atmosphere a little more hostile, but for some reason, the old man in his twilight years did not seem to harbor any hostility. Su Fengnian's peak cultivation was no longer present, but his sharp intuition was still present. As a result, when Mei Fengjie and Fan Shaochai realized that something had happened in the mausoleum and rushed into the garden, Su Fengnian only raised his hand, indicating for them to withdraw. Mei Fengjie silently left. Fan Shaochai hesitated for a moment, then continued to stand in the distance. Su Fengnian also did not make a fuss about this female sacrificial warrior's overstepping her bounds. Chapter 1355. The plainly dressed old man put his hands behind his back and said with a smile, Su Shao has never done anything that I like in his life, but he did give birth to a good son. Hearing these incredibly disrespectful words, Su Fengnian couldn't help but furrow his brows. However, he quickly felt relieved. The older generation of scholars had always paid attention to strength of character. Otherwise, how could they have the confidence to rule the world together with the emperor? Besides, it was very likely that this person was a lone official of West Chu who had concealed his identity. It was reasonable for him to have a monstrous grudge against Bailiang and Su Shao. Su Fengnian asked with a smile, May I ask if you are the master of calligraphy of West Chu? The old man's expression was somewhat strange. He neither denied nor admitted it. He just stared straight at Su Fengnian. If Su Fengnian, who resembled Wu Su in appearance, was a handsome young master in the eyes of the women of the world, then one could vaguely see that the old man in his prime had a graceful bearing when he was young. At the very least, he could be called an old jade tree. Su Fengnian felt somewhat uncomfortable being sized up. When people looked at him in Bailiang, they mostly looked at him with disdain as His Royal Highness wasted his good looks. Later, in Tian City, they looked at him with disdain as the son of a butcher. After the results of his battle with Wang Xianji came to light, there was a great change. Even Bailiang border generals, such as Li Mofen and Wang Lingbao, who were known for their arrogance, had a heartfelt reverence and admiration in their eyes. Only the old man in front of him had a strange look in his eyes. The old man said softly, Earlier, when I saw your calligraphy on the steel, I could see that you had put in a lot of hard work. You have to thank Li Yishan for being able to bravely advance on the martial path since you started practicing the blade in Wudong. Practicing calligraphy and playing chess are two different things. Once you reach a certain level, you can learn everything. Although not every master of calligraphy or chess can become a capable official of the world, or a grandmaster of the martial path like Li Mi's disciple, it is very beneficial to the molding of a person's temperament. After the hot-tempered Su Shao became a vassal, his temperament changed greatly. This has a lot to do with the fact that he learned chess in his later years. Su Fengnian did not say anything. When Su Shao made his fortune in Liaodong's Jinzhou, he was just an illiterate wanderer. It could be said that Su Fengnian's ancestors had nothing to do with any scholarly family or farming family. After Su Shao came to Bailiang, he became a terrible chess player. It was not without reason that he could play to his heart's content with his second sister Su Weisheng's master, Chancellor Wang. At first, it was because Su Fengnian's mother wanted Su Shao to play more chess to temper his hot-tempered temperament. When he was old, it was time for him to cultivate his temperament. At first, Su Shao always slacked off and escaped whenever he could. Over time, the princess consort did not say much. Later, Su Fengnian fell in love with playing chess. Probably after the princess consort passed away, the relationship between Su Fengnian, the eldest legitimate son, and Su Shao became strained. Su Shao probably wanted to spend more time with his son and finally began to seriously learn chess. However, His Royal Highness quickly widened the gap between him and Su Fengnian. After that, Su Fengnian and Li Yishan did not like playing chess with Su Shao. No matter how hard they played chess, they could always defeat Su Shao. Even if Su Shao wanted to humiliate himself, it depended on whether the master and disciple, who were the only people in the world who could not give him face, were in the mood. Su Weisheng had always been able to patiently play chess with Su Shao. However, perhaps in the heart of Su Shao, who had never concealed his preference for boys, it was more interesting to play chess with his son. Even if Su Fengnian killed all the chess pieces on the chessboard and left only a few pieces, the old Prince Liang, who had won many battles, and the lame Su, who was recognized as the most ambitious person in the Liang dynasty, would also feel very happy. His peerless achievement in pacifying the spring and autumn period allowed Su Shao to be on equal footing with the late Emperor Zhao Dun's father when they met. In the future, when he attended court, he would be able to carry a sword into the palace. However, in Mount Qingliang, many scenes always made people, especially outsiders, feel that it was absurd. Su Shao was being chased in Wutangan, and the one sitting at the head of the table at the prince's manor banquet was the young heir. Not to mention the families of nobles, marquises, generals, and ministers. Even if it was a small family, the father should not spoil his sons so much, and the son should not be so disobedient. In the end, Liang dynasty found an unassailable reason to attack Biyao. If the upper beam was not straight, the lower beam would be crooked. Su Fengnian shook his head gently, forcing himself to focus. Although the old man in front of him did not reveal any murderous intent, he was still a first-class hidden master. The great battle of Liangmang was on the verge of breaking out. If he were to die here, the place of his death would still be passable, but the timing would be completely wrong. Other things aside, at least a few 100,000 northern Mang people would be spared from death. The old man smiled and asked, "Do you think I am Qi Lianhua from West Chu?" Su Fengnian nodded. The old man slowly stretched out a palm. "When you pick up the brush, you must concentrate, just like the sages of the previous dynasty when hundreds of people sat at the same table. Your heart is righteous and your qi is harmonious. Only then can you understand the mystery and be close to the great way. The way is like the heavy weapons of a national temple. If it is empty, it will be full. If it is full, it will be overturned. If it is only in the middle, it will be flat." The old man's hand gesture changed. The ancient people's wrists were haunted by ghosts. When they wrote, it was as if they were assisted by the gods. Therefore, if the tip is straight, it will be full of power. If the second is heavy, it will be the real finger. If the real finger is flat, it will be flat. If the palm is empty again, it will be used as one wishes. Together, the scholar's calligraphy is also. De Chu has nurtured its soldiers for 200 years. The country has been destroyed for 20 years. There is still a morale that cannot be disgraced. For the ring, it will be melancholy. For the wave, it will be limp. When the brush is sent out, the proud Su will come out. As the old man spoke, wind and thunder filled the garden. Outside the mausoleum, Mi Fengjie's face was pale. The sword in the case on his back was trembling incessantly, as if it had been struck by lightning. In the garden, Fan Xiaochai's face was pale. She was on the verge of collapse, but she still gritted her teeth and stubbornly refused to take a step back. This old man's palm slowly turned over. It seemed like he was just picking up the brush and slowly sketching. It was like a pedantic old man teaching the children of a private school how to write stroke by stroke. However, in Su Fengnian's eyes, it was a perilous situation. It even reminded him of the time outside the Great Hall in Tai and City, when Gu Jiantang had used the world's #1 talisman blade, Nanhua, and used the Thunder Cube to return the courtesy of Chao Chongqing. The two were different paths leading to the same destination. They both had the ability to turn something rotten into something magical, reaching the realm of perfection. The wind and snow drifted. Su Fengnian's expression was heavy. Previously, he and the sword grandmaster Mi Fengjie had both believed that the remnants on the stone tablet were sword qi drawn by fingers. Now, it seemed like they were off by a hair. This old man used a blade. Su Fengnian did not look at the chaotic wind and snow that seemed to have been cut by blades. He asked, "So old Sir Qi is the blade armor of the 13 armors of spring and autumn?" The old man did not answer the question. Instead, he bent his 5 fingers slightly and made a closing gesture. He asked in return, "Is it a joint plan?" Su Fengnian, who was standing in a circle with not a single snowflake in a radius of several zhang around him, helplessly replied, "It is the character for Yin." The old man withdrew his hand and sighed, "Yes, the character for Yin." Su Fengnian. The wind and snow in the garden finally returned to normal. Snowflakes rustled and fell on Su Fengnian's head and shoulders. Chapter 1356. The old man who should be West Chu's sage of calligraphy, Qi Lianhua, laughed self-deprecatingly. Spring and autumn saber armor? Saber and brush officials, saber and brush officials. Saber and armor it is. For thousands of years, the world had always been proud of practicing the sword. Not to mention paladins, even scholars from all over the country often carried swords when they traveled to study, to show their spirit. In the competition for the head of 100 weapons, sabers were always inferior to swords. In terms of numbers, sabers did not lose to famous swords. Moreover, most of them were legendary in Jianghu. For example, the big frost saber in the hands of Su Fengnian's disciple, the stories of its previous owners could be said to be soul-stirring. However, ever since Lu Zhu became famous for beheading people with flying swords, the way of the sword became the most outstanding branch in Jianghu, while the reputation of the saber man became worse and worse. There had never been a master who used the saber to reach the top of the way of the martial arts. In the last 100 years, there were sword armor Li Chungang and peach blossom sword god Dong Tai. Although they both lost to Wang Xianji, no one could deny that these two champions of the way of the sword were outstanding. On the other hand, the number one saber user, Gu Jiantang, had never been ranked high on the list of martial artists. His reputation in Jianghu was also mediocre. No one had ever heard of anyone practicing the saber because they admired Great General Gu's kung fu. There were some who picked up the saber because they envied Great General Gu's military achievements, but the world's men, even the devil Han Diaosi, said before his death that he had once thought of roaming Jianghu in green with a sword, let alone other young men. How many women had heard of Li Chuangang's name and could not forget him? Even Su Fengnian himself, who pretended to be a young swordsman in Biyao before he practiced the saber in order to deceive women, wished that he could hang famous swords all over his body. The sage of calligrapher, Qi Lianhua, was actually the saber and armor that only Jianghu caught a glimpse of. This truth was really moving, and even more so, it made people envious of West Chu's flourishing scene in those days. It was indeed worthy of being the orthodox literary lineage of the Central Plains. There was Li Chungang wielding his sword across the great river of Guangling, there was a literary hero who distributed small boats and drank wine, there was 100 poems, there was a woman whose beauty could cause the downfall of a city or a state. There was also the state preceptor Li Mi and the proud master and disciple of the Chao family working together to stop a game of chess when the snow began. It was no wonder that some people said that the destruction of West Chu was not the fault of the emperor, the scholars, and the common people. If they wanted to hate, they could only hate that the heavenly time was in Liang and not Jiangchu. The old man waved his hand at Su Fengnian. The old man was the first to crouch down. Looking at the tombstone of Princess Consort Wusu, his attitude was no longer as spirited as before. There was only the bleakness and desolation of the most ordinary lonely old man in the world. In a low voice, he murmured, "What does Su Shao count for? He's just a crude martial artist. It's fine if he marries a woman of passable beauty." Su Fengnian was furious. He laughed coldly and said, "Old sir, do you really think that if you and I fight to the death, Su Fengnian will definitely lose?" Qi Lianhua dismissed it with a smile and asked, "You haven't gone to your hometown in Jinzhou to pay respects to your ancestors, have you?" Su Fengnian didn't answer. In reality, it wasn't just him. Su Shao hadn't gone to Jinzhou since he was made empress. Su Fengnian's grandfather had passed away very early. At the time, Su Shao had just left Liaodong and was fighting fiercely with the powers of the vassal towns in the south of Liang. After Su Fengnian was born, he had never seen his grandparents. Su Shao was the only child, so he didn't have any relatives from the Su family. In the early years, some distant relatives from Jinzhou had run to Biyao to claim kinship with Su Shao. Su Shao, who had been looked down upon in his youth, could be considered extremely benevolent and gave them a share of wealth and glory. As for the elders on his mother's side, Wang Fei Wu Su almost never mentioned them. When Su Fengnian was young, he would occasionally hear his mother mention that his maternal grandmother was a good person who got along well with others. It was a pity that she had passed away early. As for who his maternal grandfather was, his mother had never said a word. Su Shao also wasn't willing to say much. Only once, when he was drunk, did he angrily say that the old man had died a long time ago? Su Fengnian guessed that Su Xiao must have been rejected outside the Wu family's sword tomb when he had asked for marriage. He had been beaten by his father-in-law with a sword until he pissed his pants. From then on, they had formed a grudge and never had any contact with each other again. Su Fengnian also had resentment towards that maternal grandfather. Later on, his aunt at Mount Qingqing always wore armor and covered her face. It was the Wu family who had made things difficult for his mother that caused his aunt, a sword attendant, to have her face cut beyond recognition by the sharp sword Qi. Although it wasn't his maternal grandfather who had done it, Su Fengnian felt that if that maternal grandfather had said a few words of justice and treated his mother's running away from home, the Wu family's sword tomb wouldn't have been so cruel and vicious. Especially after learning that his own uncle, Wu Qi, purposely met in Beimang but didn't acknowledge him. In the end, he went to Shishu to assist Chen Jibao. Su Fengnian really didn't have any good feelings towards relatives and elders with the surname Wu. Even though the current head of the Wu family, who he should have called great-grandfather, had taken the initiative to make up for it once on the Beiliang border, Su Fengnian couldn't help but feel a knot in his heart. The old man let out a long breath and said ruefully, "I once helped to Chu compile the history books of the previous dynasty and read them all. At the time, although my bladesmanship didn't have the name of a grandmaster, it had the strength of a grandmaster. However, when I was compiling the history books, I often felt terrified at night. There was no other reason than the 3 words people eat each other everywhere in the books. Although it is normal for the world to rise and fall, every time there is a turmoil, the suffering of the people is really unspeakable. On the road outside the outskirts, dawn and dusk are like sheep herding. The clamor of eating and choosing the fat part, the swift blade descends to strive for victory. What kind of tragic scene is this? The road is full of the dead, and the living are ghost neighbors. The common people of the world are half-wandering ghosts. This isn't a poet in troubled times moaning about nothing. I saw with my own eyes that at the end of the spring and autumn period, boys were sold for a few copper coins, and girls were only worth a handful of corn. Later on, some parents couldn't bear it and exchanged children for food with others. In the end, people in the world were no longer human, but worse than ghosts. How can I not hate Li Yang? How can I not hate Su Xiao, who went all the way south to destroy cities and countries? In the old days, the nobility's house was a place where foxes and rabbits roamed. In fact, it wasn't just the nobility's house that was like this. Su Fengnian grabbed a handful of snow from the ground and held it in his palm. He couldn't help but interrupt the old man's speech. Su Xiao said that a person should know their place. The first-class scholar Qi Jiping, the second-class scholar, can also complain for the common people. As a warrior who carries a blade, he only knows how to fight and only fight. If you give him a few thousand people, he will conquer a city. If tens of thousands of people, he will conquer a country. When he has hundreds of thousands of cavalry, what else can he fight if not the world? So later on, when so many people scolded him, he never talked back. He also didn't think that what he did was right. In the Beiliang army, the older generation like Yan Wenluan, Zhong Honggu, He Zhonghu, and the younger generation like Chu Lushan, Li Mofen, and Chao Xiaojiao, which one of them isn't a notorious veteran ruffian in the eyes of the world? Su Fengnian's expression was firm as he said in a deep voice, but it can't be denied that if someone has to be the butcher who helps Li Yang unify the world, then Su Xiao is definitely the best result. Qi Lianhua sighed. I really haven't thought about this. The old man who was deep in thought suddenly laughed. Huang Longshi has a poem that is widely circulated. The country is broken, the mountains and rivers are still there, the city is in spring and the trees are deep. This old man of the Song family in Liang commented that the word deep is not as good as the word life. If we use the word life, we can combine movement and stillness. The scholars of Li Yang's literary circle all applauded. What do you think? Su Fengnian said calmly, my second sister once said in Shangyin Academy that this old man of the Song family changed a dog's fart. Qi Lianhua asked, then aren't you curious about which family Su Weisheng is the daughter of? Su Fengnian was touched and couldn't hide his anger. It's none of your business. Qi Lianhua narrowed his eyes and smiled. Su Fengnian, oh Su Fengnian, you really are similar to your father, Su Shao. Su Fengnian took a deep breath. I respect Sir's loyalty to West Shu and your many years of hiding in Biyao Palace to protect the fallen Princess Jiang and I. But Sir shouldn't think that you can really do whatever you want in the Su family. The old man didn't think much of it and sneered. Oh. At some point, the two of them were standing in a position where Qi Lianhua's back was facing the entrance of the mausoleum and Su Fengnian's back was facing the two tombstones. Then, the two of them took a step forward at almost the same time, but the back of their feet was stepped on by the other's other foot. Su Fengnian used his 2 fingers as a sword and stabbed the old man between his eyebrows. The old man raised his palm and slapped Su Fengnian's chest. The old man's body spun like a top. At the same time he removed the finger sword, his large sleeves fluttered, stirring up a snowstorm and creating the scene of an earth dragon drinking water. Su Fengnian was pushed to the tombstone by the palm strike. He stuck one hand to the back of the tombstone and pushed lightly, borrowing the force to charge forward. Su Fengnian, who was in the air, kept his 2 fingers together and swiped them across the top of the old man's head. Boundless sword Qi immediately poured down from the sky. The old man sneered. His footwork was completely different from the martial artists of the world. His 2 feet were slightly tilted inward, one hand behind his back and the other clenched into a fist. He stepped forward in a straight line and avoided the sword Qi. His fist just happened to land on Su Fengnian's stomach. The fist was as heavy as a drum. Borrowing the force from the rebound, his 5 fingers immediately loosened and he pushed out with his palm. Su Fengnian's body flew backwards, exploding with ear-piercing sounds like firecrackers in the snowy night. Qi Lianhua's fist, palm, and footwork were all very simple and straightforward. It was easy to associate him with the conceited Wang Xianji, who had once regarded himself as an enemy of the world. He was as fast as lightning and as powerful as a thunderclap. He only used his bare hands to face his enemies and disdained all the divine weapons in the world. Su Fengnian was actually not that heavily injured. He had only been pushed back by the old man's single move. His heart was in turmoil, and the qi in his body that was already in a mess became even more unrestrained, like adding oil to boiling water. This gave him a new understanding of the spring and autumn saber armor. He originally thought that Qi Lianhua was at most on the same level as Sui Xiagu, but it seemed that he was at least a little bit higher. If it was before the Zhanlong, in Liuzhou, Su Fengnian was confident that even if saber armor went all out and he was careless, he would not be in such a difficult situation. After Su Fengnian landed, a trace of blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. However, he did not wipe it away. He did not care, nor did it matter. Su Fengnian had experienced many life and death battles, and this was not the first time he had experienced them. The old man clicked his tongue and said, "With your current terrible situation, you would have at most used 3 moves to put your life on the line. Against a normal Vajra or mysterious finger expert, 3 moves would have been enough. Unfortunately, you met me." Su Fengnian calmly said, "There was no need for 3 moves. 1 move was enough." The old man asked, "Even if you die, you still want to protect the 2 tablets behind you? If you die, what's the point of the tablets? Aren't you, Su Fengnian, the king of Biyao? Don't you know how to choose?" Chapter 1357. The old man was probably a true old man. He was rather talkative. At this moment, he was still advising him with kind words. "Kid, the world's beauties are like bamboo shoots after the rain. Even if it's a source of soldiers, there's still an endless supply of them. However, there are 2 things that are difficult to replenish. One is the heavy cavalry on the battlefield. One is missing, and it's very difficult to quickly replenish them. The other is the Jianghu experts. Every one of them needs talent, luck, and many years of training to become one. Especially you, Su Fengnian. You have to cherish your life. If you die..." The snow gradually grew heavier. Su Fengnian ignored the old man's nagging. He raised his hand. A snow knife appeared in his hand. However, the old man suddenly became sentimental. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the sky. Biyao, fighting a country with the power of one land. If you die, the old man muttered to himself, his expression bleak. I don't care at all whether Biyao has a king of Biyao or not. However, how can I, Qi Lianhua, not care whether Su Fengnian dies or not? A hint of confusion appeared in Su Fengnian's eyes. After being struck by Qi Lianhua's fists and palms, the qi in his body actually showed signs of turning from bad to good after experiencing the initial violent tremors. It began to stabilize. The old man's face was filled with anger. He glared and said, "Kid, only now do you understand my good intentions?" Su Fengnian was confused, but he still gripped his snow knife. He asked in confusion, "What are you trying to do?" The old man who had once said that he would return on a snowy night became even more angry. "Kid, aren't you a clever person? Why are you so stubborn?" Su Fengnian was also angry. He glared at him. Looking at the stubborn young man, the old man seemed to remember some things from the past. The stubborn old man who had been unyielding in this world all his life softened a little. His tone was gentle, and he said somewhat helplessly, "I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to guess. Didn't I use the alias Wujiang?" Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Didn't I already guess that you are Qi Lianhua and the spring and autumn saber armor?" The furious old man suddenly stomped his foot heavily. The wind and snow above the entire mausoleum froze. "Didn't Su Shao tell you that his father-in-law's surname isn't Wu? Even if that bastard Su Shao didn't mention it, didn't mention it to you either? Didn't I tell you that there was a swordsman surnamed Shi who fought in the Wu family's sword tomb for a woman of the Wu family and almost destroyed half of the sword mountain?" Su Fengnian turned around. His expression could not be seen clearly, and there was no change in his tone. No. No. The old man was truly enraged. He pointed at Su Zhao's tombstone and cursed, "You barbarian from Jinzhou. Back then, in order to marry my daughter, you said that you wouldn't kneel to the heavens or the earth, but now you're kneeling to your father-in-law. You're just a small military officer with a few hundred people under your command, yet you dare to threaten me. If I don't agree, you'll definitely lead an army to wipe out Chu. I should have killed you with a single palm at that time." When the old man fell silent, there was only the sobbing of the wind and snow in the courtyard. The old man's eyes were kind, but his face was also full of guilt. He gazed at the back of the young man who was far more pleasing to the eye than Su Shao. He slowly said, "The first time I secretly saw you, it was when the Su family's armored cavalry was on their way to Biyao. It was also a snowy night like this, in a small temple. You were punished by your mother to study all night. You held a book in your hands and sat on the knees of the Buddha statue in the main hall. Under the light of the Buddha statue's everlasting lamp, you read until dawn. Beside you, there were 4 clay statues of heavenly kings. They either carried sabers or swords, or their faces were ferocious. The light of the lantern was dim. Outside the hall, the wind and snow were like female ghosts weeping and complaining. Even an adult would be afraid, but a child like you was not afraid. I watched you from the beam for the whole night. I really liked you from the bottom of my heart. You really are my grandson." The old man's heart surged with a heroic spirit that came from his grandson. "I don't recognize Su Shao as my son-in-law, but I like you as my grandson. Even if Su didn't recognize me as her father, I still shamelessly came to Liangzhou. After Su died of illness, I changed my name and became a lowly servant. Who am I, Qi Lianhua? I can win and lose on the chessboard with Chu's imperial advisor Li Mi. I can drink wine with Tai Fu's son Shiji and talk about the country. I can stand shoulder to shoulder with Yi Baikue on the battlefield. I can make Chao Changqing, who is waiting for the imperial decree, call me half a teacher." Su Fengnian, who had his back to the old man all this time, squatted down and looked at the 2 tombstones. He asked, "Why didn't you formally marry my grandmother back then? Instead, you let my grandmother and my mother depend on each other for survival in the eyes of the family." The old man was silent. His eyes were full of sorrow and regret. Su Fengnian said softly, the country is beautiful, the country is beautiful. The country is in front and the beauty is behind. Do you think the country is more important? Or do you think that a real man doesn't have to worry about not having a wife? You are the famous icing man of spring and autumn. Do you think that women are just icing on the cake in your life? Su Fengnian asked again, why didn't you protect my mother during the white clothes case in the capital? Without waiting for an answer, Su Fengnian said in a hoarse voice, trembling, so I didn't know I had a grandfather. I just thought he died a long time ago. Whether his surname was Wu or Qi, whether he was a hero or a nobody, it didn't matter at all. After a long time, the old man sighed and was speechless. Su Fengnian sat cross-legged in front of the tombstone. He bent down and reached out to brush away the snow in front of the tombstone. Qi Lianhua walked to the tombstone and lowered his head to look at Su Zhao's tombstone. He said indifferently, when I heard the news and rushed to Tai and city, it was already too late. The old man said self-deprecatingly, it doesn't matter if you don't recognize me as your grandfather or if you think that Qi Lianhua is cold-blooded. I think that no matter how much you dislike the man your daughter chose, a married daughter is like water that has been poured out. Moreover, at that time, 3 sabers and armors couldn't kill the Liang Emperor, Zhao Dun. Since that's the case, as for the Yuan Benshi, Su Shao, Han Xingxian and Lu Haoshi, as long as Su Shao is alive, it's him who has the courage to do it. If Su Shao can't do it, there are still my daughter Wu Su's children. The old man turned to look at Su Fengnian, who was constantly sweeping the snow with his hands. He said softly, the Taoist saints said that life and death are like sleep. When you sleep, you can get up and live. When you sleep, you can't get up and die. Therefore, there is a great terror in this world. When people are alive, they cry instead of laughing. In the Buddhist scriptures, there is also a great terror of life and death. The old man also squatted down and said freely, maybe you're right. Su Shao is much stronger than the spring and autumn saber armor or De Chu. It's just that I don't want to and don't dare to admit it. The old man looked at Su Zhao's tombstone and said with a smile, in the end, I couldn't even drink a cup of wine from you. Su Fengnian said softly, it's too late. Su Fengnian's eyes reddened. In the past, I couldn't understand why there was a pair of shoes in the box under Su Zhao's bed that didn't fit anyone in the Su family. The old man was stunned. Then the old man laughed loudly. He clenched his fists and rested them on his legs. Spring and autumn is a dream of spring and autumn. People live for a lifetime, but life and death are 2 things. When you come, you cry, but when you leave, you smile. Then the old man stretched out his hand and held a cup. A crystal-clear cup of snow appeared between his 5 fingers. Snow fell from the cup. He said loudly, father-in-law toasts to my son-in-law. A cup of snow for wine. A cup of wine without wine. Little Nian, this old man wants to make a trip back to Guangling. I've left my hometown for too long. Don't send me off. After toasting, the old man turned around and patted away the snow on one of his grandson's shoulders. He took out a yellowed book from his bosom and gently placed it beside Su Fengnian. With one last sentence, the old man stood up and shook his sleeves. He began to stride towards the entrance of the mausoleum. As soon as he left, his figure flashed and disappeared. Su Fengnian, who was a step too slow, was completely unable to stop him. Outside Liangzhou city, the old man walked further and further away. His speed was so fast that even Bailiang's A-ranked horses could not match him. A cold blade gradually formed from snow appeared in the old man's hand. Everyone knew that De Chu practiced calligraphy all his life. His favorite characters were Su, Nian, and Chun. His daughter, Wu Su, was gone, but his grandson, Su Fengnian, was still alive, and he was very promising. He had nothing to worry about in this life. It was time to get rid of the nickname of Qi Banbu. There was no harm in making the name of Qi Tianhua a reality. Little Nian, take it as your grandfather's last selfish act. Let the world know that after your father died, you still have an elder in this world. With me, Qi Lianhua, there is no one who can disgust Bailiang without paying the price. The great pillar of the country, Gu Jiantang, can't. The new emperor of the Zhao family can't either. Little Nian, you just need to guard the northwest gate of the Central Plains. Su Fengnian's figure flew quickly and stood alone at the top of the city wall. However, all he could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. After standing for an entire night, at daybreak, Su Fengnian remembered the old man's last sentence and muttered to himself, "Can I really do it?" In the spring of the second year of Jianghu, a terrifying piece of news was sent back to the capital from the borders of Liao and Liao. Gu Jiantang had lost. Moreover, he had lost to a person who used a blade. More importantly, the martial arts grandmaster who had appeared out of nowhere did not mention his name. He only mentioned an unimaginable identity. At dusk, in the suburbs of Tai and City, two men who were about one generation apart in age sat opposite each other in a pavilion. The younger one was the young phoenix of the Song family, Song Kelly, who had recently made a comeback in the capital. Song Kelly had not yet taken up a post in the capital, but Jean Lanting, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, had invited Song Kelly to his family banquet several times. Many old people in the capital, especially the nobles of the imperial clan, had also expressed their goodwill. Chapter 1358. Song Kelly, who was supposed to be proud of his success, had a sad look on his face. He looked at Mr. Yuan, who was drinking, and said sadly, "Even if that person is a great guru who is better than General Gu, Tai and City was able to deal with the man with a sword who brought his family along. Why can't they deal with another martial artist?" Yuan Benshi smiled and glanced at Song Kelly without saying a word. Song Kelly's hand on the table was clenched tightly. His face was pale and his lips trembled as he said, I know. After the late emperor died, Mr. Yuan's identity is just an old man in the Hanlin Academy who has no one to rely on. The current emperor can't wait to get rid of his shackles. The appearance of that old man gave him a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to kill with a borrowed knife without staining his hands with blood. Therefore, the imperial guards in the capital city can't be mobilized. The Qi cultivators in the imperial astronomer can't be mobilized. The Jianghu masters who rely on the imperial court can't be mobilized either. Mr. Yuan, is Tai and City going to burn the bridge after crossing the river again? Does the Zhao family not want any face at all? Song Kelly lowered his head. Mr. Yuan once taught me that serving the emperor as a subject is akin to burning a stick of incense for a Buddha. A new emperor brings in a new subject, and it's because the incense is broken. Yuan Benshi, whose tongue was cut in half, looked calm. He put down the wine cup and said vaguely, yes and no. What I said earlier was only the way of being an official. But there's a more original way of being a person that can't be forgotten. Offering incense to the emperor is actually a skill, not a Tao. Song Kelly, your real Tao is to add oil to the world besides burning incense. This is the foundation that Grand Secretary Zhang Julu left for Liang. As a counselor, I don't think I'm inferior to anyone. But as a subject, Zhang Julu is the first person to start a new era. You should learn from his Tao, not my skill. Otherwise, Song Kelly would only be a Yin Mao Chun or Zhao Yuling at best. What was the point of Yuan Benshi nurturing Song Kelly? How will you stand out among your peers like Sun Yin in the future? Yuan Benshi looked at the twilight outside the pavilion and said with a smile, the famous ministers and ministers of the spring of Yonghui are destined to leave their names in the annals of history. But for those of you who started during the auspicious talisman era, perhaps your legacy in the annals of history will be better than that of those old people. That's because Yonghui has Zhang Julu, who makes all the scholars in the world pale in comparison. Your generation is different. Chen Wang has the smooth and slick Fu Long, Sun Yin has the shrewd Tu Long, and you, Song Kelly, have the fierce lone minister. Each of you has your own dazzling style. Song Kelly didn't dare to raise his head to look at Mr. Yuan, who had accompanied him all over the country last year. Yuan Benshi said in a low voice, various parties tried to rope you in, but I kept telling you to wait for the best offer. So last night, the ceremony directorate chief Song Tonglu's disciple found you and gave you a verbal order. You don't have to feel guilty. If you can't wait to tell me about Yuan Benshi, then I will be disappointed. Song Kelly suddenly looked up. Yuan Benshi smiled indifferently and said softly, "He's here." A person walked over from afar. There was a strange snow-white long blade hanging from his waist. Song Kelly stood up and blocked the steps of the pavilion. The old man didn't seem to move, but Song Kelly, who was skilled in martial arts, was thrown out of the pavilion. After the old man sat down, Yuan Benshi put 3 wine cups on the table and gently pushed a clean cup in front of the old man. Yuan Benshi smiled calmly and said, "Back then, I was curious as to why Mr. Qi would force his way through the gate of Tai and city. Later, I saw Xia Feiyu give me many authentic copies of Mr. Qi's calligraphy. In the early years, there were many Chun characters, and in the later years, there were many Sunian characters. Zhao Go had tried to assassinate His Royal Highness 16 times in Biyao, and 3 of them were most regrettable because of Mr. Qi's interference." The old man didn't raise his cup to drink. Instead, he put the snow-white blade on the table and said, "This old man will still let people drink a few mouthfuls of death wine. Drink slowly." Yuan Benshi raised his head and drank all the wine in his cup. "Since Mr. Qi has the intention to kill but doesn't have the intention to do so, why are you still pretending?" Qi Lianhua sneered and said, "It turns out that Yuan Benshi is nothing more than this." Yuan Benshi shook his head and said, "In life, some people are greedy for wine, and some people are greedy for life. It's human nature." Qi Lianhua said, "Li Yishan and Nalin Yusi, one helped Su Shao to conquer the spring and autumn period, the other helped Xiao Bing to seize the world. This is the real world. As for Huang Longsher, you can't even compare with him. You, Yuan Benshi, have been guarding the world all your life. What's funny is that you haven't been able to guard it. The reason why I didn't kill you is that not killing you is better than killing you." Yuan Benshi mocked himself and said, "Mr. Qi, are you deliberately keeping me alive so that you can fight each other?" Qi Lianhua stretched out a finger and tapped the snow-white blade made according to the earliest Su blade. "It's a good Su blade, but it's too boring to use it to behead a dog." Yuan Benshi was unmoved and said with a smile, "Mr. Qi, since you didn't kill me, then I also have a word of advice. Killing me is just a small matter, but it's not easy to go to the city to find Emperor Zhao Zhuan. Compared to the former emperor, the current emperor is much more afraid of death. I believe that Su Fengnian would rather his grandfather return to Beilyang safely than to see you die heroically in Tai and city, even if the way you die can be called magnificent. Su Fengnian has finally made a clean end to his past life and future life. If you leave, it won't even be the icing on the cake, let alone providing timely help." Qi Lianhua was surprised and said, "You, Yuan Benshi, only have half of your tongue left. Not only can you speak, but you can also speak a few words." Yuan Benshi still looked happy and pointed to the wine pot. "For so many years, the wine pot of Huadiao wine has always been filled with Beilyang green ant. Mr. Qi, are you sure you don't want to drink a cup?" Qi Lianhua raised his cup and drank it. The old man got up and left the pavilion, but he left the blade and said, "You 3 emperors of Liang have all wronged Su Shao." Yuan Benshi watched the old man leave. After a long time, he nodded quietly. Song Kelly staggered into the pavilion with his hand on his chest. He was relieved to see Mr. Yuan safe and sound. After Song Kelly sat down, Yuan Benshi stood up and looked at the sky. He said sadly, "The sky is going to rain, and the mother is going to get married. But I don't want some things to happen just like that." A smile appeared on Yuan Benshi's face. "Mr. Qi, I'm just saying good words when I'm about to die." When Mr. Yuan turned to the stone table and held the cold blade, Song Kelly suddenly had a bad feeling and his face turned pale. Yuan Benshi looked into the distance. It should be Song Tonglu waiting. Zhao Zhuan doesn't have the courage to do that. Yuan Benshi withdrew his gaze and tossed a brocade pouch to Song Kelly. "Tell that head seal eunuch that if he wants to live longer and better than Han Xingxian, let him see something like this." Song Kelly fidgeted as if he had received a hot potato. His eyes were bloodshot. Yuan Benshi said sternly, "Song Kelly, put away the brocade bag. Get up and take the blade." Song Kelly stood up subconsciously, but he panicked and took a few steps back. He didn't look like a young phoenix of the Song family anymore. Yuan Benshi took a step forward and handed him the cold blade. Song Kelly shook his head frantically. The master of Liang rebuked him with a ferocious face. If you don't kill Yuan Benshi, how can you stand by the emperor's side? Song Kelly's face was full of tears. He kept repeating, Mr. Qi, I won't kill you, Mr. Qi, I won't kill you. Yuan Benshi sighed and put the blade on the table. Then he turned his back to Song Kelly and said calmly, heroes don't have freedom. If you don't kill me, I'll be a useless person. Even if I live a few more years, there will be no trace of me in the world. Yuan Benshi closed his eyes and said softly, Song Kelly, don't let me down. Huang Longsher and Li Shan, I'm one step behind you. Nalan Yusi, I'm one step ahead of you. Song Kelly held the cold blade with trembling hands. Yuan Benshi suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the afterglow in the distant sky. The emperor's tutor with a half-inch tongue opened his mouth and took a deep breath, as if he was borrowing the last breath of this world. He roared, take the head. Song Kelly's face was full of pain. He raised the blade and chopped it down. The head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, who wore a bright red python robe with a cold expression, leisurely walked to the bottom of the steps of the pavilion. He saw the young man, whose life had been full of misfortune, sitting on the ground in a daze. Blood and tears flowed from his eyes, and he held the head in his arms tightly. Outside Tai and city, the old man narrowed his eyes and looked at the towering city wall. He smiled. I, Qi Lianhua, have always been ambitious but not capable. I've always wanted a lot of things. I wanted to surpass the ancients in calligraphy, I wanted the prosperity of my family, I wanted the longevity of Dechu, and I wanted the well-being of the common people. But in the end, I achieved nothing. The old man held his hands and sighed. My last request is very small. I just want to be a senior who can let me have a clear conscience. It was on this day that an unknown old man entered Tai and city and went straight to the imperial astronomer. He killed all the Qi trainers and 800 guards of the imperial astronomer. This crazy old man didn't say anything from the beginning to the end. He only said one sentence to himself before he died. Xiaonian, don't forget what Grandpa said to you. Remember to believe in yourself and Biyao with you. The old man's words were exactly the opposite of Yuan Benshi's unintentional words. When the time comes, heaven and earth will work together. Chapter 1359. After the new emperor of Liang ascended the throne, he attached great importance to the administration of culture, especially the Hanlin Academy. His love for the Hanlin Academy was so great that it could not be increased any further. First of all, he moved Zhao Jiaong's yamen to the right side of the center line between the Wuing Hall and the Baohe Hall. Then he issued an edict that the Hanlin Academy's head scholar and the Ministry of Rites would jointly preside over the imperial examinations, which became a practice of the current dynasty. Therefore, the saying, in the future, those who are not from the Hanlin Academy are not allowed to enter the pavilion, spread everywhere in the capital. Today, the Hanlin Academy, which was holding a grand housewarming ceremony, could be said to be a gathering of heroes. What a dazzling lineup of splendid scenes! Jean Lanting, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, who made his name here, Li Jifu, the new Zhuangyuan of the first year of Xiangfu, who held a post in the Hanlin Academy, Wu Congxian, who was both Tanhua and a new talent in the chess world, Song Kelly, the young phoenix of the Song family, who moved to the Hanlin Academy because of meritorious service, Yan Qiji, the son of the grand scholar of the Dongyuan Pavilion, Chen Wang, the assistant minister of the left scattered cavalry of Liang, Sun Yin, who was once the right chancellor of the Imperial College. Before this group of young talents, the oldest of whom was no more than 30 years old, gathered together, many important officials and officials who had a relationship with the Hanlin Academy had already left one after another. For example, Zhao Yuling, the second in command of the Imperial Secretariat, Tantanon, Huan Wen, who was recognized as a veteran of the Hanlin Academy, the heavenly official Yin Mao Chun, who had been in charge of the Hanlin Academy for more than 10 years and had recently entered the Ministry of Appointments, and the Minister of War, Liu Baijie, the sword immortal of Tangxi, who had the title of Xia Guan, had come either alone or together. They really made the brand new Hanlin Academy shine, staining it with an air of nobility and elegance. At this time, in the secluded courtyard at the beginning of spring, under a small tree with branches as small as jujube flowers, everyone was enjoying a game of Go. The people playing Go were not national players, nor were they the famous Wuxia who had defeated 3 national players in a row in the capital. Instead, they were 2 people whom everyone in the court felt were unfamiliar with. There was a huge age gap between the two. There was a stone table and 4 stone stools. On the table was a yellow rosewood chessboard that was very old-fashioned. On the left and right sides of the chessboard were black and white Go boxes that contained white and black Go pieces. On the stone stools were embroidered cushions. The 2 people playing Go were of course sitting and chatting. However, the people sitting on the other 2 stools were the pinnacle of honor in the world, the current emperor, Zhao Zhuan, and the empress, Yan Dongwu. Other than the handsome young man nicknamed Little Bookcase by the emperor, there was also a commoner from Liang who was still a commoner. He was Fan Changho from Xiangzhou, Guangling Road. Together with Wu Congxian, they were known as the First and Third Nine. In the past, Fan Changho was more skilled than Wu Congxian, so he was also known as Fan Shiduan. At the same time, Fan Changho was good at painting dried rocks, wild plum blossoms, and winter bamboo. Among them, wild plum blossoms were the best, and they were proud and unsullied. Now in Tai and city, there was a saying that Fan Changho was a tree alone in spring. His paintings could be said to be priceless in the capital's officialdom. Before Wu Congxian became famous, the hidden Fan Changho was specially summoned to the capital by the emperor. The reason for this imperial edict was that his real identity was Little Bookcase from the imperial astronomer. Under the emperor's instructions, he and Wu Congxian played 6 games in a row, 3 slow and 3 fast. Wu Congxian lost all of them cleanly, so Fan Changho, who was known as the #1 player in the chess world, naturally entered the emperor's sight. The prize for this game that the emperor personally set was not small. If Fan Changho won, then he could directly stay in the Hanlin Academy as the Yellow Gatekeeper. Now the Hanlin Academy was the well-deserved dragon pavilion for all the scholars in the world. The spectators were the smartest few people in the Liang dynasty. In fact, they were well aware that whether Fan Changho won or lost on the chessboard was not important. To simplify the emperor's heart, Fan Shiduan had already won outside of the chessboard. Little Bookcase was probably endowed with extraordinary talent, but in the end he was still a child. He did not have a good sitting posture. His body was slanted, one hand supporting his chin, the other hand moving quickly. It was almost as if he was hitting the board when Fan Changho placed a piece. On the other hand, the plainly dressed Fan Changho was at a disadvantage in terms of the demeanor of an otherworldly master. But this disadvantage was only in terms of the eccentricity of the imperial astronomer. In reality, Fan Changho was sitting calmly and attentively. Whether it was slowly picking up a piece from the chessboard or not moving, when he was thinking long and hard, they both had the demeanor of a grandmaster. Fan Shiduan's response to Little Bookcase's aggressive attacks, both inside and outside of the chessboard, was neither too fast nor too slow. For the time being, there was no sign of victory or defeat between the 2 of them. Including Emperor Zhao Zhuan, the people who were able to stand aside and watch the game, not to mention Wu Congxian, who was very good at chess, even Shen Wang, who had never played chess with anyone before, had good eyesight. Even Empress Yan Dongwu, who was known as the female scholar of Biyao in the past, could not take her eyes off the game and was very focused. Yan Qiji was standing right behind his elder sister, who was known as the mother of the empire. He was the only one who gave up halfway when he went to the border to observe the political affairs. He parted ways with the Ministry of War, who was sent from Ji Bei to Liaoxi, and returned to the capital alone. This incident had damaged Yan Qiji's reputation in the scholarly circle. However, with the great protective talisman of the imperial uncle, no one dared to jump out and criticize him. Yan Qiji looked at the intrigue on the chessboard. He quietly raised his head and looked at the old Chinese parasol tree whose branches were filled with the joy of spring. His face was filled with fatigue. If the trip to Liangzhou had disappointed him and Kong Wuqi, then the trip to Ji Bei had angered Yan Qiji. The defense line in Ji-Bei had been an important military base for the Central Plains to defend against Beimeng since the Han family. Although Li Yang paid more attention to the two Liao provinces, the generals who held the military power in Ji-Bei were all carefully selected by the Ministry of War and candidates who were placed high hopes on by the imperial court. But what did Yan Qiji see in Ji-Bei's northern pass? It was retreating before the battle and shrinking the defense line. Faced with his reprimand, the few border defense generals were vague. Gao Tingshu, who was picky in Biyao, was surprisingly silent. Obviously, he had received instructions from someone in the capital. Yan Qiji retracted his gaze and looked coldly at Jin Sanlang, who was not far away from him. The latter also sensed the unfriendly gaze from the young imperial uncle, but he responded with an impeccably gentle smile. Yan Qiji met his gaze. Suddenly, Yan Qiji felt his sleeve being pulled. He lowered his head and saw his sister pointing at a spot on the chessboard. She smiled gently and said, "Eunuch Jing seems to have made a wonderful move. Don't you think so?" When the child heard the empress praise, he raised his head and smiled brightly. Yan Qiji sighed softly. He stopped arguing with the assistant minister and turned to watch the game. Fan Zhangho's response was still lukewarm. This made Chen Wang, who was also a relative of the imperial family like Yan Qiji, see him in a new light. Ordinary poor scholars would spread their tails like peacocks if they wanted to see the face of the emperor. It was not easy for Fan Zhangho to be so relaxed. The Zhuangyuan, Li Jifu, was the son of a wealthy family in Liaodong. In terms of poetry, he was not as good as the second place, Gao Tingshu. In terms of the four arts, he was far from being as good as Wu Zongxian. Thus, most people in the court thought that he was not worthy of the title of Zhuangyuan. In reality, in the poetry club founded by Jin Lanting, it was rare to hear Li Jifu speak so loudly. However, a few days ago, the Minister of Revenue, Bai Gua, had asked to borrow Li Jifu from the Hanlin Academy. This made people realize that perhaps Li Jifu was not as unlikable as he appeared on the surface. Today, the only person in the group who could compete with Jin Lanting, Chen Xiaobao, only spoke a few words with Li Jifu. Wu Zongxian had originally wanted to go up and get familiar with the left Sanchi's assistant minister, but soon there was an awkward silence. Compared to everyone present, Song Kelly's appearance today was the most unexpected. The two masters of the Song family who had dominated the literary world for decades were not worthy of the words, extremely tragic. After their deaths, their posthumous titles were only below average. At the time, Song Kelly had been demoted from the noble Hanlin Academy to a county magistrate. Jin Lanting, who was more familiar with the rules of the officialdom, was very curious. How could the young phoenix of the Song family, who had fallen from a high branch into the mud, return to the capital? Who had he latched onto? For the time being, the nobles of the imperial clan did not have this ability. Tantanon had always had a bad impression of the Song family, so all the old people of Jianghu did not have a good impression of Song Kelly. He had also not heard of the head of the secretariat, Qi Yanglong, having any interaction with the Song family. Jin Lanting pondered for a moment, but could not understand the main point, so he was too lazy to bother. Song Kelly's ups and downs were destined to not affect the overall situation. In the past, Jin Lanting did want to take the initiative to show goodwill to the eldest grandson of the Song family, who was also a member of the Hanlin Academy. He even wanted to personally send him a few hundred knives to make his own signboard, but now? Even the assistant minister could turn a blind eye to this person. In a small court meeting filled with officials, he, Jin Lanting, could only respectfully accompany the last seat, but at this time and place, he was worthy of being called the head of the Phoenix. As the Hanlin Academy rose in status in the Liang Imperial Court, the position of the Ministry of Rights would also rise. It was certain that he would be in charge of the Ministry of Rights in the future. When the time came, the Ministry of Rights would be in charge and the Hanlin Academy would be in charge. Then, he, Jin Lanting, would be the common teacher of all the scholars during the auspicious era. Jin Lanting smiled and bowed his head, looking down at the chessboard. He placed one hand on the suet jade belt on his waist that the emperor had personally bestowed upon him, and the other hand quietly clenched. The literary vein of the world was in his hands. Why should he worry about the connections in the imperial court? Chapter 1360. Wuxia was probably the one who cared the most about the outcome of the game. With a complicated expression, he looked at Fan Jianghu, who had played against him many times, and felt bitter. Fan Jianghu, a remnant of the spring and autumn period, also known as the son of Buddha, was a thorn in Wuxia's heart that he could not remove. No matter how much they talked in public or in private, Wuxia knew that he both despised and envied this person. He despised Fan Jianghu for ignoring the imperial examinations, and envied Fan Jianghu for having heavenly beings by his side to scheme for him. Before and after he had defeated 3 national chess players in a row, Wuxia had not once mentioned Fan Jianghu. However, the well-informed capital quickly learned that there was a Fan Shidwan in Jianghu. Before the emperor summoned Fan Jianghu to the capital, he had a relaxed monarch and minister question-and-answer session with him. Wuxia could only bite the bullet and say something insincere. Fan Yuetian and I are evenly matched. Unfortunately, he still could not stop the emperor's curiosity, especially after he had suffered consecutive crushing defeats to the child who was practically the reincarnation of a chess immortal. According to Jean Sabin, the emperor had urged the Ministry of Rites almost every day to ask when Fan Shidwan would enter the capital. To be able to receive such special treatment, the previous one was the prime minister who had said, "If I don't come out, what will the common people do?" When Fan Jianghu returned to the capital alone, Wuxia went to the courier station that night and, earnestly, told Fan Jianghu about that child prodigy style of chess. The first move looked sloppy, unintentional and powerless, but in the middle of the game, it suddenly changed. It was as if a towering building had suddenly risen from the rubble and ruins, with the momentum of a lion hunting down a rabbit from above. Of course, Wuxia knew that this kind of illusory saying was equivalent to not saying anything. After Fan Jianghu heard it, it was useless. As for why he only said the middle game and not the end game, it was not that Wuxia wanted to hide it, but that Wuxia had never played more than 200 games with the child. Wuxia, who valued face and reputation the most, was too embarrassed to say anything. Wuxia had, with great difficulty, made a name for himself in the capital, so how could he be willing to let Fan Jianghu steal his limelight in Grand Peace City? He wanted nothing more than for Fan Jianghu to suffer a crushing defeat. Simply put, Wuxia, one of the top 9 chess players in the world, could lose to the genius youth rumored to have come from the imperial astronomer. It was like the world's top martial artist losing to an immortal on Earth, without any damage to his reputation. But he absolutely could not lose to Fan Jianghu by too much. This was just like how Li Chungang had lost to Wang Xianji, and then Wang Xianji had lost to Su Fengnian. Fan Jianghu's slow play was only compared to the lightning-fast speed of the imperial astronomer's little bookcase. 2 hours later, after Fan Jianghu had made more than a dozen consecutive moves, he had made his first decisive move. The child with a carefree expression seemed to have seen his opponent for the first time. He no longer rested his chin on his hand or looked left and right. He sat up straight, but he did not look at the game. Instead, he stared straight at Fan Jianghu, who was rolling up his sleeves with his head lowered. Everyone present, including Wuxia, could not see the essence of this move, let alone the other spectators. Among them, Jean Lanting could not help but turn his head to ask Wuxia in a low voice. The latter did not dare to speak carelessly. Sun Yin stretched out 2 fingers to rub his earlobes and yawned. Song Kelly narrowed his eyes and pursed his lips tightly. Chen Wang was carefully observing the changes in the expression of the imperial astronomer. Li Jifu carefully looked at the emperor, who was leaning forward with a frown. Yan Qiji, whose mind was on the chessboard, bent down and whispered to his sister, Yan Dongwu. If the calm and composed Fan Jianghu was included, not counting the emperor Zhao Zhuan, the empress Yan Dongwu, and that imperial astronomer Jian Zheng, then today under the green Paulownia tree of the Hanlin Academy, there were as many as 4 people from the northern Liangdao, Chen Wang, Sun Yin, Yan Qiji, and Jean Lanting. Gangnamdu had Wuxia, Guangling had Fan Jianghu, Liangliao had Li Jifu, and the capital had Song Kelly. From this, it seemed that the current emperor was more magnanimous than the previous emperor towards Biyao. The emperor looked at the little bookcase with interest. For the first time, he showed a fierce expression towards a certain person. He tried to smooth things over. Let's close the game for now. You two can play later. Little bookcase, Fan Jianghu, try your best to make this game a famous one. If the ending is even better, I will ask the masters in the palace to paint for you. I have to go attend a small court meeting. If I am late, I will be nagged by Tantanon for half a day. Jean Lanting, dressed in purple robes, quickly bowed slightly and made a path for the emperor and the empress. The emperor held the empress's hand and left with a smile. Yen Qiji saw them off alone. As the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting also had to attend the small court meeting. However, the emperor did not say anything, so he could not stick to the emperor's side. After all, he could be suspected of using the emperor's power to intimidate others. After the three families left, he purposely pulled Wu Zongxian out of the Hanlin Academy. The latter had been observing politics at the Ministry of Rights. Compared to the quiet Li Jifu, who had a higher ranking in the court examination, Jean Lanting favored Wu Zongxian, who was also a pillar of the poetry club. He also had a higher opinion of Gao Tingshu, who had already made a name for himself in the Ministry of War. Yen Dongwu asked softly, "Why do you think so highly of Fan Jianghu?" The emperor turned his head and winked at the empress. He said softly, "Winning in chess is just a small matter. What benefit does it bring to the country? However, King of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, has a blind chess player, Lu Su. As the emperor of a country, how can I not have a Fan Jianghu by my side?" Yen Dongwu could not help but laugh. "You can be angry over this? Your Majesty, are you still a child?" The emperor said with a face full of resentment, "Am I old in your heart?" Yen Dongwu suddenly remembered that his younger brother, Yen Qiji, was still following behind him. He coughed lightly. The emperor laughed out loud and did not take it to heart. He purposely slowed down his pace, allowing his brother-in-law, who had been snubbed in Ji Bei, to catch up with him. Then, he comforted him softly, "I won't advise you to do anything regarding Ji Bei, I just want you to not be anxious. I heard your sister say that she does not want to stay in the Ministry of War anymore. Where do you want to go? The Ministry of Rights or the Ministry of Appointments?" Yen Dongwu was about to speak when the emperor tightened his grip on her hand. She could only swallow her words. Yen Qiji was obviously afraid of his sister, who was becoming more and more imposing. He hesitated for a moment before saying softly, "Your Majesty, I want to come to the Hanlin Academy. There are many books here." Chapter 1361. The emperor glared at him and said, "When there are no outsiders, call me brother-in-law. However, it's not a problem for you to come to Hanlin Academy, but you have to start as a servant first. Otherwise, I don't mind letting you be a big servant. Your temper is too gentle and you don't want to fight for anything. You will definitely be ostracized by many elders. Those old scholars are not the same as the officials of the 6 ministries. They don't care if you are the emperor's uncle." Yen Qiji nodded. The emperor turned to Yen Dongwu and smiled gently, "You two should talk more. As an outsider, I won't be an eyesore." When the emperor walked away with Song Tonglu, the number 1 eunuch of the dynasty, Yen Dongwu asked in a low voice, "Why didn't you return the thing I gave you to that person?" Yen Qiji's face was slightly pale. He said guiltily, "I didn't see Brother Feng." She said sternly, "Shut up." Yen Qiji's body trembled and he asked carefully, "Or should I secretly destroy it?" Yen Dongwu almost instantly became angry. Then, she tried to suppress her anger. Her face was uncertain. Finally, she gritted her teeth and said, "Hide it well." Yen Qiji was dejected. After Yen Dongwu calmed down, her tone softened and she praised, "You didn't say you were going to the Ministry of Rights and the Ministry of Personnel." "Very good." Yen Dongwu stood face to face with her brother. She helped him fix his collar and said softly, "You have to remember one thing. Wen Zhengwen is loyal and respectful. These 3 beautiful titles must come from Hanlin Academy." Yen Qiji said timidly, "Sister, I didn't think so much." "Really?" Yen Dongwu bent 2 fingers and knocked on her brother's forehead. She smiled. You, a fool has a fool's fortune. Yan Qiji wanted to say something but stopped. Yan Dongwu obviously guessed what he was thinking. She shook her head and said, don't worry about the things in the palace. Let's go back. I have a feeling that the young people in that courtyard will. Speaking of this, the Empress stopped talking. She looked up at the sun. It was dazzling, so it was a bit dazzling. Yan Qiji returned to the courtyard. Under the tree, the child was asking with a cold face, who did you learn chess from? Fan Zhangho smiled and said, since I was 4 years old, I learned chess from the ancients. The child pointed at the last move on the chessboard. The ancients couldn't make this move. Fan Zhangho calmly said, our generation is inferior to the ancients, how can we face the future generations? It's true that you learn chess from the ancients, but when it's your turn to play chess, you can't sit and wait for eternity. The child snorted and glanced at the chessboard. If it weren't for the accident in the Imperial Astronomer and my absent-mindedness, I wouldn't have given you any chance to win the game today. Come to the star-picking pavilion of the Imperial Astronomer tomorrow. Fan Zhangho declined to comment. The child, who acted like an old man, ran away in big strides. Only at this moment did he have the childishness of his age. Ever since he was a child, he had been running around the little bookcase of the Imperial Astronomer. It was not easy for him to find the Empress whom he was closest to. Contrary to the imposing manner of this child when he played chess with others, when he saw Yan Dongwu, he had a childish smile on his face, like a child who had met his sister who loved him dearly. Yan Dongwu rubbed the little bookcase's head and said sympathetically, it's been hard on you. The Imperial Astronomer has suffered such a huge accident, and His Majesty still wants you to play chess with others. I'll help you scold him later. In the accident in the tight blockade not long ago, there were more than 800 guards who had died in the battle. Most of them were elite imperial soldiers who were highly skilled in martial arts, and there were also dozens of masters who had koi fish pouches. Especially the latter, when they were escorting something to Guangling Road, more than 100 of the top Jianghu people who had been recruited by the Ministry of Justice of the Imperial Court had all died mysteriously. Zhao Go had already been seriously injured, and this loss was no different from adding fuel to the fire. But compared to the real loss, the death of the Qi cultivators in the Imperial Astronomer was nothing at all. Among these so-called immortals, there was no lack of experts with the mysterious finger divine ability, and they were indispensable to the Imperial Court of Liang. Their existence in itself was a kind of magnificent deterrence that could symbolize the majesty of the heavenly Tao. The emperor was the person who was destined by heaven, so he was under heaven's command. In the end, the Qi cultivators of the Liang North faction who supported the dragon were all killed in that bloody battle. Why did the current emperor, who had always regarded chess as an idle hobby, move the Hanlin Academy in a hurry? Why did he personally create momentum for Fan Shidhuan and Fan Changho? Or was it because he wanted to divert the attention of the officials and try his best to suppress the turbulent ripples that affected the entire capital? Yan Dongwu even saw with her own eyes that the cultured and elegant fourth prince locked himself in the imperial study for an entire night. When he came out, even the head eunuch Song Tonglu did not dare to approach him. It was she who had to personally go forward and bandage his bloody left hand. The little bookcase shook his head and said, Grandpa Jianzheng said that everyone has to die. I'm not sad. If I didn't have to play 3 rounds of chess with someone for Grandpa Jianzheng, it wouldn't matter even if I died there. Then the child silently said in his heart, although the old man is dead, his disciple might have already appeared. He would not tell anyone about this matter, not even his sister Empress. Yan Dongwu laughed angrily and said, don't say such unlucky things. How old are you? Live well. The little bookcase laughed and said, I want to eat osmanthus cake. Yan Dongwu held his little hand and walked in the palace. That will have to wait until autumn. So, all the more you have to live well. In the Hanlin Academy, when Yan Qiji approached, he found that the atmosphere was a little strange. Chen Wang, who had the highest rank, and Li Jifu stood at the side and chatted. The arrogant scholar Sun Yin, who had once fought with the scholars in the Imperial College, was lying on the stone table. Fan Changho was reviewing the game in detail. Yan Qiji had already stopped in his tracks. Suddenly, he saw Song Kelly, who was alone, smiling at him. Yan Qiji smiled knowingly and walked forward. In the spring of the second year of Jianghu, there were 6 people in this small courtyard on this day. Chen Wang, Sun Yin, Song Kelly, Fan Chengho, Li Jifu, Yan Qiji. Originally, I had already written more than 2,000 words about the Battle of the Gourd in Yuzhou. However, if I want to combine it into a chapter, I need to write at least 4,000 words. Otherwise, only 9,000 words will be too intermittent. Today, I'll just write 6,000 words. This kind of transitional chapter is probably as unlikable as Li Jifu in the book. However, I hope that everyone can hold their noses and read it. Of course, when I wrote it myself, I was very sentimental. Yes, sentimental I rarely boast, but when I write this kind of scene that can freeze history, it really is very sentimental. P.S. Don't worry, the next battle will be one after another. Biyao and Guangling can be considered as fighting a country by one land. Chapter 1362. In a relay station 3 miles away from Chongqing City in Yuzhou, a young man wearing a thick fur coat stood on the side of the road. Beside him was a child who was reading a yellowed book with saliva. Biyao Road's relay station had many willows planted on both sides, but this relay station was a little different. There were only parasol trees that could tell the difference between spring and autumn. It was said that there was a lot to pay attention to. Back then, when General Su Shao was conferred the title of king, the rich people of Chongqing City, in order to please this butcher, who was known to kill without blinking an eye, specially changed to nearly 1,000 green sycamore trees. It was all because His Royal Highness had the word Feng in his name. Feng does not rest on sycamore trees. Unfortunately, the army took a detour and continued to head west. Su Shao did not enter the city at all. This made those rich people feel very embarrassed. However, after His Royal Highness was conferred the title of King of Biyao, the new King Liang's trusted aide, Huang Fujin, was promoted to General of Yuzhou and became the master of Chongqing City. Therefore, those old people were very happy. Every now and then, they would boast to their juniors about their foresight. Last year, when Huaihua General Zhong Hongwu was in charge of Lingzhou, the officialdom was turned upside down, but Yuzhou was peaceful. These old men were very proud. Huang Fujin also took care of these old people's families. Currently, there was an interesting saying in Chongqing City: it's never too late to flatter someone. Dust rose from the relay station in the distance. The sound of horse hooves was getting closer and closer. The young man put away his thoughts. The leading rider was wearing a rare purple robe in Biyao. It should be known that the purple robe in the capital was inferior to the red robe in the capital. It meant that the power of the purple robe in the capital was not as good as the local officials in the red robe. When the governor dismounted and was about to kneel, the young man smiled and waved his hand. We are in a hurry, so there's no need for that. Let's talk in the carriage. The person who came was General Huang Fujin of Yuzhou. Of course, only the king of Biyao, Su Fengnian, could make him kneel. The two sat in the carriage. Su Fengnian's eldest disciple, Fang Long, carefully put away the book and became the coachman. The sword master Mi Fengjie, who carried a long box on his back, and the death warrior Fan Shaochai, who wore a cold blade at her waist, guarded the left and right of the carriage. Su Fengnian and Huang Fujin sat opposite each other. One was casually sitting cross-legged, while the other was kneeling. Huang Fujin apologized and said, "I've kept you waiting." Su Fengnian didn't say anything. Huang Fujin also knew that this kind of official entertainment would only make the man in front of him feel disgusted. He immediately said, according to the latest intelligence reports, the spider web pole catchers, butterfly catchers, and Beimang Jianghu experts who infiltrated Yuzhou have all been killed. Apart from the 6 missing, 2 of them were instigated. One of them was used to fish out the 6 fish that slipped through the net, while the other was used as a hidden chess piece to return to Beimang. Su Fengnian nodded. He wouldn't meddle in specific affairs and wouldn't criticize the whisk room that Chu Lushan had painstakingly built. Thus, he changed the topic and asked, "How's Su Yanbing?" Huang Fujin replied, he's still on the way. Apart from Tai Chi, and Ko Ku who died on the spot, the other 8 fled northward. 6 days ago, Pabing Peak's chief Wei Yila was the first to be abandoned by the other experts. He killed Yufengqi for Su Yanbing. 4 days ago, Beimang's devil Ahima died 30 miles north of Yozhou's border, but he successfully stalled Su Yanbing. Fortunately, 3 days ago, the Qi cultivators of the Guanyin sect found some clues and discovered that the 6 had turned back to Shilu County in the northwest of Yuzhou. They almost escaped. 2 days ago, another 2 Beimang experts were killed by Su Yanbing's spear. Su Fengnian chuckled softly and said, "Then there's only the small idea of the princess's grave left." The great Yufu, that old lover of spider webs Li Mibi, and Tai Madai, who had the highest chance of becoming a sword immortal after his sword aura neared Huang Qing's level. 10 top experts were dispatched together. Moreover, they had used all their schemes, but in the end, they ended up in such a miserable state. I'm afraid that the old woman and Li Mibi didn't expect it. Oh right, rumor has it that Tai Madai, is very young. Beimang's underworld has always said that he's the Dong Tai of the grasslands. Moreover, his realm skyrocketed during his escape. Not only did he rapidly advance to Finger Xian, but his last sword move also had some demeanor of a sword immortal. Is this true? Huang Fuji nodded and said, Tai Madai, is different from the other Beimang experts who have stagnated in their realms. His martial arts cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. Almost every time he went through a life-and-death battle, he would gain something. According to the spy report, this person is at most 28 or 29 years old. He has a medium build, but moss grows under his armpits like dragon scales. It's rumored that he has the aura of a real dragon. At this point, Huang Fujin sneered and said, Tai Madai's ancestor was indeed a mighty lord of the grasslands. The last bit of vitality of the great Feng dynasty was tormented by his ancestor. As for the dragon scales under his armpits, I think it's nonsense. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, it's not that simple. Since Huang Qing's fate didn't bestow a piece of the willow after his death, it must have landed on Tai Madai. Perhaps the Bronze Man Grandmaster's portion was also given to him. Although Huang Fujin was from the underworld, he hated the underworld the most. It could even be said that he hated it to the bone. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed and said, in the end, he still died. Who asked him to meet a half-step martial saint? I can see that Uncle Su's realm is also rising steadily. His small half-step is more terrifying than others who break through several realms. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and leaned against the wall of the carriage. He said slowly, the old underworld will soon be extinct under the iron hooves of war horses. I wonder what the underworld will be like in the future. Before this, be it the Fish Dragon Gang in Bailiang or the Great Snow Plateau in Mount Hui, they'll all be short-lived. Dao De Sect, Chess and Sword Music School, Mount Bubang, Princess's Grave. Mount Wudong, Su Yanbing, Suaxia Valley, Mifengjia, Wu family's 100 cavalry and 100 swords. In addition, there were the Guanyin sect in the South Sea and Mount Lantua in the west who could no longer leave. How many more masters would die in Bailiang? Huang Fujin said resentfully, Northern Mang has just casually mobilized 20,000 cavalrymen, and all 80 strongholds outside the Great Wall of Northern Ji County have moved inwards. What a bunch of fearless good-for-nothings. If they are so capable, why don't they just give up Hengshui and Silver Harrier cities as well? Su Fengnian said calmly, the general of Silver Harrier City, Lu Yanlang, is a famous fence-sitter. When the wind blows in the capital, he can move faster than the officials in the capital. With Yuan Tingshan in North Ji County, it's certain that they'll deliberately let Bailiang win. Let's not have any hope. With a gloomy face, Huang Fujin said, if Lu Yanlang really gives up Silver Harrier, then Horizontal Water City will be left alone outside the border. Besides, the general who controls Horizontal Water City, Wei Jingtang, is one of the few favorite students of Grand Secretary Zhang Julu who rose up in the military. For many years, this man has always had a strong hostility toward Bailiang. Now that Zhang Julu is dead, Wei Jingtang can barely protect himself, let alone go against the Ministry of War. Perhaps, he will withdraw even more decisively than Lu Yanlang. With that, North Ji County's gate is wide open. Once Beimang continues to send in more soldiers, and with Gu Jiantang's western frontier army remaining still, there's a possibility that North Ji County will be attacked from both front and rear. Yu Wandao's Yuzhou cavalry will be in a bad situation. Previously, when they roamed outside the Great Wall of North Ji County and cut off Beimang's army supply, they will become empty talk. Su Fengnian sneered and said, "Don't worry. If Lu Yanlang and Wei Jingtang don't want to guard the gate, we'll let Yu Wandao's 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry help them." High up in the sky, a handsome bird suddenly broke through the clouds and dived down. Yu Dilong, who was acting as the coachman, raised his arm with a bright smile on his face. The bird landed on the child's arm with its claws like hooks and a powerful force. Fortunately, Yu Dilong's qi was strong and vigorous. This gerfalcon, a 6 years phoenix, came from Liaodong. It was brewed by Chu Lushan himself and gifted to His Royal Highness. The tributes from Liao were divided into 9 grades. Among the gerfalcons, which were said by the hunters of Liao, 9 years death and 1 life is rare, the 3 years dragon and the autumn yellow were the 2 rare breeds, and the 6 years phoenix was even harder to find. Su Fengnian was traveling Jianghu for the first time. Other than Old Yellow and the inferior horse, he was accompanied by this 6 years phoenix. Yu Dilong cheerfully called out, "Master." Su Fengnian poked his head out of the curtain and took the spear falcon. He intimately patted its head before untying the string on its leg. Then, he lightly shook his arm. The 6 years phoenix spread its wings and flew high up. It circled above its master's head a few times before suddenly rising up and flying away. The information that came back was only 3 simple words: guard to the death. The meaning was very clear. Wei Jingtang would guard Horizontal Water City to the death. Su Fengnian sighed softly and said, "The wind knows the strength of the grass." In his joy, Huang Fushi asked doubtfully, why would Wei Jingtang risk his life to guard Horizontal Water City? Could it be Protector General Chu's secret plan? Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "No matter how skilled Fu Shuifang is, he can't bribe a scholar like Wei Jingtang." Su Fengnian thought for a while and said, "It's probably because his master Zhang Julu's death that made Wei Jingtang make up his mind." Huang Fushi was still indignant. "It's a pity that Ji province only produced 1 Wei Jingtang." Su Fengnian said expressionlessly, "Why don't you say that the Liang dynasty only produced 1 Zhang Julu?" After a short silence, Su Fengnian smiled and said, "It seems like you have to go to Yuzhou alone. I'll go to Ji Bei to find Yu Wandao and take a look at that Wei Jingtang." Huang Fushi's heart trembled and he said in shock, "Your Highness, are you going to take the risk and personally lead the troops out of the calabash?" Without waiting for Su Fengnian to speak, Huang Fushi jumped off the carriage and rushed to the front of the post house. He then knelt down with a thump and did not say a word. He just knelt there. Yu Dilong hurriedly stopped the carriage. After Su Fengnian got off the carriage, he walked over to help this general of Yuzhou who had lost his composure. However, Huang Fushi, who was once mocked by the officials of Lingzhou as the #1 watchdog under Mount Qingliang, refused to get up. Su Fengnian said in a low voice, "Get up." Chapter 1363. Huang Fujin lay prone on the post road and said in a dull voice, "If I don't stop His Highness today, I will be scolded to death by Protector General Chu, Commander Yan, and Second Princess tomorrow." A king of Beiliang who killed tens of thousands of enemies and died in battle can't compare to a king of Beiliang who's living well in Beiliang. Su Fengnian frowned. "I don't need you to remind me of this. I know better than anyone what's important. Don't worry, I'll bring me Fengjie and Fan Shaochai. Besides, although my realm isn't as good as before, it's not hard for me to escape and protect myself. There aren't many top experts left in Beimang." Huang Fujin was determined to be stubborn to the end. He looked up at Su Fengnian and asked, "What if Tuoba Bodhisattva comes to kill you?" Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Tuoba Bodhisattva is on his way to Lu province. Besides, have you forgotten about Su Yanbing who's about to finish things off at the border of Yuzhou?" Seeing that Huang Fujin was still unwilling to get up, Su Fengnian kicked him and said angrily, Huang Fujin, your death remonstrance is 1,000 miles away from the imperial censor of Grand Peace City. Get up. Huang Fujin got up slowly and hesitated for a moment before saying softly, Your Highness, I'll say something rebellious. You can't die. If you die, I'll never be able to become the Gu Jiantang of Biyao. Su Fengnian only glanced at Huang Fujin's heartfelt words and dismissed them with a smile. Then, he and Yudilong each got on a horse and rode away with Mi Fengjie and Fan Shaochai. Huang Fujin didn't wipe the sweat off his forehead. Both sides knew that what Huang Fujin really wanted to say wasn't the Gu Jiantang of Biyao, but the Su Shao of Liang dynasty. One day, he would be crowned king. Huang Fujin didn't mind that Su Fengnian knew about his ambitions. The four riders galloped eastward on the post road. Lu Long, whose horsemanship was already very exquisite, turned his head to look at the cavalry and asked, Master, what did this Yuzhou general say? What oil and what lantern? Su Fengnian laughed and said, You want to say that he's not easy to deal with? Who did you learn from? Junior sister Wang Sheng or junior brother Lu Yunzhang? The child chuckled. Su Fengnian teased, missing Wang Sheng? Then why didn't you go to Beimang with her? The child quickly put on a straight face and said seriously, She went to Beimang with that white fox face to train her martial arts. How can I be a burden to her? She said that when we return to Qingliang, she will definitely beat me and Lu Yunzhang alone. Su Fengnian said meaningfully, You've already lost half the battle. Yudilong was stunned. Junior sister, are you really able to master the most powerful sword art in Beimang? Then, he couldn't help but laugh to himself. Su Fengnian shook his head. The taciturn Mi Fengjie said worriedly, In the end, Ji province is not Biyao. There are many hidden spies. Your Highness should be careful. Su Fengnian nodded. Mi Fengjie secretly glanced at the female sacrificial warrior, Fan Shaochai. This mysterious grandmaster didn't understand why Su Fengnian wanted to bring her along. Mi Fengjie was determined to keep a close eye on her, just in case. Fan Shaochai looked ahead with an indifferent expression. Ji province was once part of northern Han. In fact, it wasn't just the Han family of Ji province. Northern Han's rule had lasted for more than 160 years. Too many aristocratic families had once been Northern Han subjects. As for her Fan family, it had been loyal for generations. Su Fengnian suddenly said, This time, you might not have the opportunity to visit the graves of the Fan family's ancestors. If you decide to stay in Ji province, I can agree to it right now. You don't need to be in a hurry to answer. We can talk about it when we get there. Fan Shaochai suddenly bit her lip, causing blood to seep out. Her eyes were crazed. She laughed, I don't have the face to visit the graves of my ancestors. Since I can't kill you, and don't even dare to attack you, I can watch you die on the battlefield with my own eyes. The famed sword in Mi Fengjie's case shook violently. He angrily shouted, Fan Shaochai. Are you seeking death? Fan Shaochai's shoulders trembled slightly. Her laughter grew louder and louder. Sitting high on her horse, her face was full of disdain. TSK, TSK. A mysterious finger expert. I am truly afraid of death. Su Fengnian calmly said, Enough. Mi Fengjie took a deep breath. Fan Shaochai immediately retracted her crazed aura. Their mounts paused for no reason. The neglected child, Yudilong, looked at the old man who reached out to support the sword case, and then looked at the young woman whose fingers were a little green from holding the reins. This eldest disciple of Su Fengnian secretly curled his lips. Su Fengnian closed his eyes. He knew that many people had already begun to die in Yuzhou. The Hanlin predecessors of the Liang dynasty were not stingy with their writing when they wrote the history of Northern Han. Unlike the deliberate belittling of Vietnam and Tang, they were especially appreciative of Northern Han, especially Ji province. They called it, Ji province is full of heroes. They were all brave warriors who died with a clear conscience. However, in the confrontation with the butcher Su Shao, the Fan family, the mainstay of the Northern Han army, had one soldier after another bravely sacrificed themselves. After the Han family had submitted to the Liang dynasty and had their entire family executed, the veteran General Yang Shenxing was the first to be trapped in the Guangling circuit. Ji province was like an old man past his prime who refused to accept his old age. In the end, it was truly old. As the sun set in the west, two people stood side by side on the city walls of Transverse Water City, located at the forefront of northern Ji. The man wearing the uniform of a Liang civil official was in his 40s. He had a scholarly and refined temperament, but his face had the rough and weathered appearance of someone who had lived on the border for a long time. He was Transverse Water City's garrison general, Wei Jingtang, second in the imperial examination in the 9th year of Yonghui. However, he did not choose to use the Hanlin Academy as a springboard for his career. Instead, he first observed politics in the Ministry of War for half a year. Very quickly, he requested to be transferred to the border of Liaodong. As a result, Wei Jingtang came to Ji province. First, he served as the county magistrate of southern Ji. As his official rank grew higher and higher, the area under his jurisdiction grew closer and closer to the border of Ji province. Finally, he became the commanding officer of the military administration of Transverse Water City. He was only at the 4th rank. In terms of profiting, as long as he did not touch the border trade, he could not even compare to the county magistrates of Jiangnan. In terms of official prestige, he was far inferior to the outstanding figures who had passed the imperial examinations. There was a man from the same hometown as him who was only a top 3 Jinsher. When he was young, he had a grudge with him. In the capital, he was only the commanding officer of the Ministry of War. Over the years, he had been making things difficult for him. Previously, when the Ministry of War was observing politics at the border, there was a man from the same year who brought a letter to Wei Jingtang. In the letter, he asked Wei Jingtang how the sandstorm in the northwest tastes. He even threatened to make Wei Jingtang drink in this godforsaken place for the rest of his life. Wei Jingtang smiled at this. That fellow student who had clung onto the capital's third Prince Jean would probably never be able to understand how the barren desert frontier fortress in his eyes was, and how it could make a scholar give up his brush and join the army without regret. The young general standing beside Wei Jingtang was the young commanding officer of the Yuzhou cavalry, Yu Wandao. Previously, when the Beimang cavalry demonstrated their power outside the pass, Lu Yanlang gave up on Silver Sparrow City, leaving behind only a few old and weak soldiers and a dozen or so officials who didn't know how to show respect to their superiors. Yu Wandao's cavalry wasn't in a hurry to enter the city. Instead, they set up camp outside Silver Sparrow City. When they realized that there wasn't any movement in Transverse Water City, they entered the city alone 2 days ago to find Wei Jingtang. After that, Yu Wandao's subordinates took over the granary of Silver Sparrow City. Wei Jingtang had the right to control it, but he just turned a blind eye to it. Some of his subordinates were angry, but Wei Jingtang only said one sentence: Transverse Water City can't touch Silver Sparrow's grain. If we take even 1 grain, someone will lose his position. However, instead of being treated as an invasion by the Beimang barbarians, what's wrong with handing it over to someone who is willing to draw a blade against the Beimang? The extraordinarily handsome Yu Wandao didn't just have the peerless blade passed down from his ancestors, Great Luan, on his waist, he also had a brand new cold blade that was equally eye-piercing. He asked softly, Lord Wei, I still don't understand. However, I still want to thank you on behalf of the Beiliang. Wei Jingtang was silent. His expression was resolute as he gazed at the endless desert of yellow sand. Not moving south was a crime. Allowing the Silver Sparrow's grain to be taken by the Yuzhou cavalry was an even greater crime. If that official from the Ministry of War returned to the capital and wrote a report, saying a few words of incompetence in governance, it would be another crime. Being punished for several crimes was already enough for Wei Jingtang to lose his head. Those old brothers of his who had exchanged their lives with him in Transverse Autumn City didn't understand either. Some of them almost wanted to tie him up and take him to Jinan, saying that Transverse Water City could be defended to the death by them. They didn't need Wei Jingtang alone. However, Wei Jingtang still stood here in the end. Yu Wandao laughed, although there are some people from Jianghu who risked their lives to support the grain supply for my 10,000 cavalry, without the Silver Sparrow's granary, we would still be stretched thin today. That Yuan Tingshan can't wait to give me a taste of his own medicine. Wei Jingtang said impartially, although his character is like a clown and is loathsome, I have to admit that this man's management and command of troops is not bad. Yu Wandao looked at the wisps of smoke rising from several tens of miles away, then smiled and said, Lord Wei, just take it that I'm just trying to spite you. Today, I'm going to teach you one thing. Although the cavalry of Tranquil Province is not as strong as the cavalry of Liang Province, they are much stronger than your northern Ji cavalry. Wei Jingtang smiled faintly and said helplessly, I'll wait and see. Yu Wandao turned around and was about to leave when he suddenly turned back. He took down the cold blade from his waist and placed it on the city wall. With a solemn expression, he said, Lord Wei, whether you accept it or not, I'll give you this cold blade. I, Biyao, respect all those who dare to fight to the death. Wei Jingtang didn't pick up the cold blade. He smiled and asked, even if I'm the Grand Secretary's disciple? Even if I've been scolding General Su Shao as a traitor to the country? Yu Wandao laughed and cupped his fists. He left the cold blade behind and left in a carefree manner. Wei Jingtang watched as the eldest grandson of the Yu family, who was supposed to have a bright future in Li Yang's officialdom, walked down the city wall. He retracted his gaze and looked at the Biyao blade. He said softly, What a Biyao. Chapter 1364. Wei Jingtang raised his head to look at the sky, his eyes brimming with tears. He smiled and said, Teacher, in your letter, you asked me if I dared to go down and drink with you. Student Wei Jingtang is more than happy to do so. Outside the mouth of the gourd in Yuzhou, in a massive commander's tent that was heavily guarded by soldiers, the coals produced by the finest carp kiln burned fiercely, blocking out the spring chill. Of the 30-some people in the tent, half of them were dressed in the armor of Beimang's high-ranking military officers, while the other half were dressed in the uniform of the Southern Dynasty's Ministry of War. The latter were all between 20 and 30 years old. At this moment, the vanguard of the army had already begun to break through the mouth of the gourd. The vanguard had over 90,000 people, with the main general, Yang Yuanzhan, commanding the various troops. The main force was the 30,000 personal soldiers of this great general of Beimang, while the various garrisons of Dragon Waste Province had 40,000 soldiers. However, the true elites were the 20,000 Ruren cavalry under the command of the Southern Dynasty's assistant minister of the Ministry of War. The Ruren Mountains had always been an important source of troops for the elite cavalry of the northern plains. It produced fine horses, but it also produced strong soldiers. Most importantly, compared to other places, the Ruren cavalry were more obedient, willing to give up their lives and daring to fight to the death. Beimang and Liang had fought so many great battles during Yonghui's reign. The valiance displayed by the Ruren cavalry had even caused many famous generals of the Central Plains to raise their eyebrows. Back then, even the old Grand Secretary of Liang had to admit that the barbarians here had the style of the Great Qin. Other than the vanguard led by Yang Yuanzhan, who had already driven south, the remaining 200,000 soldiers were still biding their time outside the mouth of the gourd. Compared to the invasions of the nomads in history, this expedition south to Beimang was clearly more methodical. Yang Yuanzhan was the nominal commander-in-chief of Beimang's eastern front. However, after Yang Yuanzhan led the troops out, there was no chaos in the seemingly leaderless commander's tent. Countless orders for the deployment of troops were accurately issued from here to the various armies. This was all thanks to Dong Zhuo, the #1 military and political figure in the Southern Dynasty. After he became the king of the Southern Courtyard, he focused on restructuring the Ministry of War and added the position of strategist in front of the curtains. He took the opportunity to promote a large group of young people to become the staff of the Ministry of War. Everyone was bestowed with fine clothes and jade belts by the emperor. Hence, they were nicknamed strategist in front of the curtains. Even though their ranks were not high, they were considered to be of low status and power. As long as the strategies they formulated were reviewed by the Ministry of War in the western capital, not to mention the generals of the towns and the prairie lord, even the prefectures of the various provinces and generals like Yang Yuanzhan and Hong Jingyan had to follow the rules. After the start of the war, these strategists all left the Ministry of War and followed the army. Most of them rushed to the Eastern Front. Dong Zhuo gave them the power to act according to the circumstances. Of course, it was impossible for there to be no opposition in the imperial court in the western capital. However, Fatty Dong didn't pay much attention to them and even shamelessly used Her Majesty's imperial edict as a shield. Furthermore, the young people who rose to the center of the imperial court overnight were mostly from the Yelu and Murong surnames, or the flaming and plump aristocrats from Longguan. They were the young talents from the North, 7, South, and 3 surnames A in Beimang. It could be said that Dong Zhuo's exceptional promotion had captured almost all the top aristocrats in Beimang in one fell swoop. As a result, the saliva in the western capital didn't even need to be refuted by the king of the south courtyard, who knew how to conduct himself. However, Beimang soon realized how insidious and cunning Fatty Dong was. These strategists were divided into two groups. One group went to the eastern front to impede General Yang Yuanzhan, and the other group went to the western front where General Lu Gui was. Only the central front didn't have any strategists. However, the general situation had been determined. In addition, the war in the north of Liangzhou was destined to be the deadliest and bloodiest. It wasn't easy to gain military merits there. Therefore, the old and cunning elders behind the strategists could only pinch their noses and admit defeat. However, when almost everyone thought that the Battle of Heluku in Yuzhou was just a side dish to the war in Liangzhou, the king of the south courtyard, Dong Zhuo, actually came here in person and joined a group of strategists. In the military tent as spacious as a hall, Dong Zhuo stood at the northernmost position at one end of the long table. On the table was a sand table with mountains, rivers, and cities. The terrain of Heluku could be seen at a glance. In the last years of the Great Feng dynasty, there was a generation of mathematicians who proposed the tilt reordering method in their works. Later, there was the 6 directions map. After more than 300 years of improvement, Huang Longshe proposed the theory of altitude, which made the sand table technology reach its peak. Therefore, today's sand table was so delicate and accurate that it was enough to stun the ancients. On this sand table, the system of Heluku Wu Castle created by Hong Xinjia was most directly reflected. The 3 cities, 6 passes, and 200 strongholds were all marked on the sand table. As the number of beacon towers was too small, only those important beacon towers that occupied dangerous places were marked with small flags less than an inch long. The king of the south courtyard, who was travel-worn, had just arrived here with hundreds of Dong family's cavalrymen. After drinking a mouthful of coarse milk tea with a strong smell of mutton to drive away the cold, he asked a young strategist from a major clan in Gusai province to tell him the progress of the Battle of Heluku Wu Castle. The latter, who was holding a slender long pole made of jasper, drew a big circle on the sand table and said loudly, "Bailiang put Hong Xinjia in an important position. By the beginning of this spring, he has built 214 strongholds in Heluku in Yuzhou province." The Battle of Mount Daxing in Liang province started in the first year of Yonghui province. Upon hearing this, a prairie lord, who was planning to come to Yuzhou province to snatch food, people, and military exploits, could not help but roll his eyes and say, "Don't talk about those boring things. Just tell us where our sons have fought their way to Heluku Wu Castle and how many heads they have chopped off. It's easy for you to say it, kid, but King Dong and we can also hear it clearly. Every time I hear you people who have read books talking about it, I feel like I'm going to doze off." Dong Zhuo did not even look at that big talker, but stared at the sand table and said slowly, "Go on." The prairie lord immediately shrunk his neck and dared not to act rashly. The strategist continued, "Mount Daxing in Liang province was first proposed by the Han family of Ji province. Their original intention was to reduce the pressure of grain and fodder supply when Liang province launched the war in the early days. Later on, Liang province took the opportunity to withdraw all the border armies in Ji province and moved them inwards to strengthen the internal defense and shorten the transportation distance of grain and fodder. Once the war broke out, they could use the fort to slow down the vanguard of the enemy, and then the main force in the rear would wait for an opportunity to strike. However, over the past 10 years, Liang province has purposely placed more emphasis on the 2 Liao provinces and neglected Ji province. Obviously, they have the intention to use Ji province, a soft persimmon, as the opening of Yuzhou province. As long as our army chooses Ji province as the breakthrough point, Biyao and the two Liao provinces will be able to launch a pincer attack. The strategist pointed at somewhere north of Wu Castle with the long jasper pole in his hand. Biyao's fort is especially majestic. The big fort has more than 1,000 steps around it, and the small fort has more than 800 steps around it. The big fort has 600 steps around it, and the small fort has 300 steps around it. Moreover, the fort has never had a fixed shape. It is closely connected to the geography of Wu Castle, tightly controlling the river valley. Most of the walls are made of rammed earth, and some of them are covered with bricks. Many forts have several layers inside and outside, with different heights. If we are careless, even if we successfully break through the fort's gate, we will still have to fight a tough battle. This is enough to show Hong Xinjia's sinister intentions. For example, the group of forts here at Wu Castle, with the Jujube Horse Fort as the core, and the Green Wind Fort Be Rising Fort and the other 18 forts surrounding and protecting them. In total, there are 3,400 garrison soldiers. The first fierce battle between the two sides will definitely take place here. The jade pole in his hand shifted slightly to the south. If Biyao's Wu Castle was only blocked by these forts, it would not be worth mentioning. However, after Chen Jibao became the governor of Biyao, 3 towering and sturdy cities were built at Wu Castle. Although they are far inferior to the number 1 town in the northwest, Huda City, they are definitely not to be underestimated. This crouching Bao city, built against the mountain, is one of them. In fact, all the forts in the northern line of defense at Wu Castle are attached to crouching Bao city. Unlike the forts that only defend to the death, the 3 cities of Wu Castle each have a different number of elite cavalry troops from Yuzhou. A major 3rd-rank general from Jiu province laughed and said that Yuzhou also has a capable cavalry troop. I thought that Yan Wenluan's subordinates were only a group of soldiers crawling like turtles. The story of turtles crawling like turtles had been circulating in Beimang for a long time. In the past 20 years, most of the battles in Liangmang took place on the northern line of defense in Liangzhou. Yuzhou had always been sparse. Biyao infantry commander Yan Wenluan, this old tiger, had no power to speak of in the eyes of Beimang. The younger Beimang generals were somewhat convinced by Biyao governor Chu Lushan or the new cavalry commander Yuan Zuozong. After all, Yuan Zuozong's military achievements in the several large-scale battles in the hinterland of Beimang many years ago were obvious to all. That Lu Qiu'er even chased the current king of South Courtyard for almost 1,000 li. Moreover, Beimang's cavalry was like the wind. How could they pay attention to slow infantry? Therefore, Yan Wenluan had the nickname of Turtle General in Beimang. Dong Zhuo finally spoke with a solemn expression. All of you are clearly aware that my Dong clan army consists mostly of infantrymen. But perhaps all of you aren't aware that I, Dong Zhuo, learned from Yan Wenluan when I first trained my infantrymen. Although now it's enough to look down on most of the Yuzhou infantry, Yan Wenluan, who you laughed at as Turtle General, has 1,000 heavy armored soldiers under his command. His fighting strength is still worthy of being called the world's #1 infantry troop. How's the fighting strength of Dong infantry? Do I need to boast? Dong Zhuo raised his head and looked at the people present with cold eyes. The Yuzhou cavalry is not good enough? Don't forget that the Longxiang army that turned our Gusai province into a sieve was based on the Yuzhou cavalry. Dong Zhuo smiled gloomily, revealing his white teeth. Right, I forgot to tell you a secret. After General Yang Yuanzhan learned that he was going to fight Yan Wenluan, he had already made arrangements for his funeral. If you think that I, Dong Zhuo, am boosting the morale of others and diminishing my own prestige, it's fine. I'll say the ugly words first. When the time comes, whoever is hurt by the Yuzhou garrison, remember not to complain to me or His Majesty. Chapter 1365. The armored generals present were all a bit resentful, but the strategists who had been treated with disdain recently only felt pleased. A while ago, the latter patiently explained the terrain, structure, and distribution of troops to the vanguard generals in detail, down to the details of each fort and each beacon. This seemingly trivial information was precious military intelligence obtained by Beimang spies with their blood. Only, at that time, most of the military officers in the army were just yawning. In their eyes, wherever Bei Mang's iron cavalry went, those who surrendered would be killed, and those who didn't would be killed even more. War was just that simple. Why would they need to embroider like a woman? This kind of deep-rooted understanding could not be changed by the strategists who were only minor 6th rank and major 7th rank. However, the arrival of South Courtyard's King Dongjua, who was currently in the limelight, made all of the generals more or less alert. This was especially true when he mentioned Great General Yang Yuanzhan's funeral arrangements. It made several of Yang Yuanzhan's trusted generals break out in cold sweat. Under the hint of Dongjua's gaze, the strategists who felt refreshed began to speak tirelessly. Using continuous forts to block our army's attack was just the naive view of the civil officials in Li Yang's imperial court more than 10 years ago. In fact, back then, the embryonic form of North Ji Castle had already clearly told both sides that without a majestic city as the core of the defense, Li Yang's idea of making Mang cavalry unable to penetrate deep into the enemy was too naive. There were many forts in North Ji Castle at that time, with some 50 li away and some 30 li close. They could be said to be closely distributed to the crucial points of defense. However, back then, our great Mang used countless successful surprise attacks to prove one thing, that forts were indeed the key points of defense. Wanting to stop a nimble cavalry army from advancing south was just a pipe dream. Ji province's forts were like trees in a forest, and the troops were divided into different areas. How could they dare to fight? Therefore, later on, Li Yang's imperial censors impeached those North Ji Castle's officers, scolding them that Ko Da-ji hid like a turtle. Ko Xiaoji still did not dare to fight, only daring to fight when the Ko Da-ji retreated several hundred li. When he spoke up to hear, the strategist revealed a faint smile. He reached out his hand and pointed at his own nose. And the Li Yang imperial censors' esteemed lords are talking about is precisely our northern Mang cavalry. Everyone in the tent burst into laughter. Even Dongjua had a faint smile on his face. A grassland chief, who had tens of thousands of herdsmen under his command, laughed out loud and said, Huyan Junji, if you had said that earlier, we wouldn't have been so impatient. You always talk about how formidable those forts in Yu province are. But if you don't properly praise us great Mang boys, wouldn't we, the rough men who feel that learning to read is even more terrifying than being beheaded, not be able to listen? This time, Dongjua came to Yu province mainly to pour cold water on the generals in the East Front, but he also had the intention of improving the stiff relationship between strategists and generals with real power. In Bei Mang, especially in the northern grassland royal court, there was only one word to describe it: rough. As the number one official in the southern court, what Dongjua wanted to do was to combine the brains of the southern court with the military force of the northern court. Not only should the two sides not hinder each other, they should also try their best to cooperate. This was definitely not a daydream of Dongjua, because those strategists who knew the essence of the war in the Central Plains and were proficient in military strategies on paper were in the same boat as the generals on the front line. After all, they were bound together for good or ill. As long as Dongjua broke through the window paper, the two sides would be able to work together as one. They would earn military merits on horseback and divide military merits on horseback. If they could take down Yu province and Biyao in one go, it would be tantamount to taking off the clothes of this pretentious noble lady in the Central Plains. By then, the iron cavalry of Bei Mang would be unstoppable, and the ruler of the Central Plains would be surnamed Murong, just like His Majesty. Dongjua subconsciously clenched his teeth, his eyes blazing. As long as he could take down Biyao, the general trend would be in the hands of Bei Mang. In the future, it would be impossible to rely on the famous generals of Liang to stop the iron cavalry from going south. The only real enemy of Bei Mang was the tall cities that were in the way. Thinking of this, Dongjua walked to a side table in the tent. On the table, there was a wooden model of the three cities inside the gourd mouth. It was made by skilled craftsmen. The Taiping order had ordered the craftsmen in the western capital to make it carefully. There were about 40 of them, including all the important cities in Biyao. They were specially made for the generals on the front line to know the structure of the cities in Biyao. There were 8 of them in Yuzhou on the eastern front. 3 of them were placed in the tent for the time being. At that time, the carriage was bumpy, and the wooden model made from Chang'ing City was broken into pieces. Many strategists went to the imperial clan official in charge of the delivery to ask for an explanation. That guy, who had the surname Yelu, picked his nose and said whatever he wanted. At that time, there were dozens of strong retainers behind him. They had already taken out their swords and were about to chop those strategists. Then, a few days later, an imperial edict arrived. That imperial clan official was beheaded on the spot, and all his retainers were sentenced to death. The brand new wooden model from Chang'ing City was also sent. The eunuch who delivered the edict only said to the official's backer, "This model was personally supervised by the Taiping order." Therefore, the trembling Yelu general immediately gave up the idea of crying injustice for his nephew. The strategists once again described the structure of the wooden model to the generals in the tent. They explained what the battlements were, what the parapets were, what the horse-faced platform was, and what the various crossbow configurations were, interspersed with the battles of the Central Plains in a certain dynasty. When the strategist whose mouth was dry finally finished speaking, Dong Zhuo said in a deep voice, "Everyone, the cities in the Central Plains are filled with traps, and the layout is exquisite. You must remember one thing. As siege generals, the more we know how to defend a city, the more lives we, the northern Mang men, can have." Dong Zhuo raised his arm and pointed in the direction of the gourd. Crouching Bao City is the first city in Yuzhou. In order to uproot it, we will definitely have thousands or even tens of thousands of people die there. It is destined that we will never be able to return to our hometown on the grassland. Of course, I hope that everyone in our army can enter the hinterland of Yuzhou alive. We can even fight all the way to Xiangfan and Liang and the southern border guarded by the king of Yan. We can see what the sea looks like. But this is not realistic. People will die in war. Otherwise, General Yang Yuanzhan would not fight this battle with the determination to die. Dong Zhuo's face suddenly turned ferocious. He said sternly, "I, Dong Zhuo, came here today just to say a few words from my heart. Even if my Beimang men have to die, they will die in a place further south." Chapter 1366. If I have to die, I don't want to die in Biyao, where the land is barren and the territory is narrow. I want to die in the rich Central Plains, under Grand Peace City, on the shores of the South Sea. Beimang's 90,000 vanguard troops poured into the mouth of the gourd like a flood bursting through a dam. Those forts were like unremarkable pebbles on a shoal, instantly submerged. The northernmost beehive fort at the mouth of the gourd, together with the 6 beacons and 197 Yuzhou officers, all died in battle, without a single arrow remaining. Clear Phoenix Fort was broken through. 362 men, all unsheathed cold blades, died in battle. White Horse Fort was broken through. 213 men, without a single place within the fort, all died in battle. At the heart of the northern group of forts at the mouth of the gourd was Jujube Horse Village. Corpses were strewn everywhere. Apart from the Beimang cavalry, who had been seriously injured and flustered, who added a blade to the back of the corpses, not a single person died while fleeing. Their wounds were all in front of their bodies. Apart from the last Chicken Crow village in the south, all of the 18 forts around Jujube Horse Village were broken through by the Beimang army. Not a single person surrendered. Chicken Crow Village was different from the other forts, which were mostly built in river valleys. It was located on a precipitous cliff of a short mountain. Countless Beimang cavalry quickly passed by the 2 sides of the mountain, whistling through the air like the wind. Most likely in pursuit of speed, they wanted to push out of crouching Bao City as quickly as possible. They didn't pay any attention to this isolated and unimportant little village. Within the village, there wasn't even a commander-in-chief, but a mere deputy commander-in-chief. When all of the soldiers were gathered together, there were more than 230 of them. Everyone could clearly hear the loud trampling of Beimang horses at the foot of the mountain, as well as the strange cries of those northern barbarians as they galloped forward. Chicken Crow Village's deputy commander-in-chief, Tang Yanchao, was a tall, middle-aged man. He was a classic veteran ruffian from the border. Alcohol was prohibited in the army, and there were several times where he had messed up matters because of alcohol. This man, who could have become a commander-in-chief long ago, was wasting his time in Chicken Crow Village. Every time he drank, Tang Yanchao would brag to his mostly young subordinates about how he had once been the personal guard of the previous cavalry deputy commander, Wei Taizhan, and how he had followed the commander-in-chief in his early years and slaughtered his way through Beimang territory. The youngsters in the village at first, but after years and years of listening to those things, calluses. As a result, every time Tang Yanchao bragged after drinking, many people would shake their heads and make faces. If Tang Yanchao wasn't drunk to death and saw these little bastards imitating him behind his back, he wouldn't get angry to see these little bastards to not know how to respect a hero to respect. In the past, even when Yuzhou generals came to patrol the village, Tang Yanchao, who didn't wear his armor neatly, was dressed meticulously for the first time. Even his sloppy beard had been shaved off, making him almost unrecognizable as the great deputy commander-in-chief. If it were any other time, there would definitely be a few bold young soldiers who would approach him with a mischievous smile and say, "Oh, the deputy commander-in-chief looks like a dog. Why haven't you found your sister-in-law yet?" However, at this moment, most people only had heavy hearts and couldn't squeeze out a smile. The elders from the stronghold stood beside Tang Yanchao and were also silently inspecting the armor and crossbow sabers. Tang Yanchao looked around and said indifferently, "Those who aren't over 20 years old, and those who are the only children in your families, stand obediently where you are. Those who aren't, take a step forward." Not counting Tang Yanchao and the 7 people on his left and right, more than half of the 221 people in front had walked out. Tang Yanchao looked over and suddenly pointed at a baby-faced soldier and scolded with a smile, "Biyao, if I remember correctly, you're only 18 years old. You don't even look like you're 15. Scram back." Look, the great deputy commander-in-chief had finally put on some airs of this official, but he was immediately exposed after a few words. He deserved to be called this old man for the rest of his life. The soldier named Biyao blushed and said loudly, "Father said that it's a matter of course for soldiers to fight and be paid. Then, it's also a matter of course to go to the battlefield and kill the enemy." Tang Yanchao put one hand on the Biyao saber at his waist and said with a smile, "Then, didn't your mother secretly tell you not to fight with your life?" Biyao's face was full of embarrassment. He said softly, "She really did." Laughter immediately broke out. After Tang Yanchao raised his hand, the village returned to its previous silence. This deputy commander-in-chief, who probably hadn't even heard of the Yuzhou provincial governor, said in a deep voice, "General Yan previously ordered that our Calabash fort only needed to defend to the death and not go out to meet the enemy." Tang Yanchao paused for a moment. "Therefore, I, Tang Yanchao, am going out to kill the barbarians this time because I, Tang Yanchao, have disobeyed military orders. Those who stand in place and stay in the fort, and those who step out don't need to go down the mountain. Yes, once we go down the mountain, we'll be stuck at the foot of the mountain for the rest of our lives. There's nothing to hide. No one's an idiot. I, Tang Yanchao, have lived for 40 years and have gone to the battlefield more than 40 times. If we count it up, it's more than once a year. Other than not being able to find a wife in this life, there's nothing else to say. You kids who haven't even reached the age of 20, it's still too early for you to live long enough. Live well." Tang Yanchao pointed to the north and said fiercely, "This old man can't become a commander-in-chief or a high-ranking official. It's not embarrassing. But Li Jing, Hu Lin, and Lu Ziyuan in the fort in the north must have died in battle. If this old man hides and doesn't die, I can't afford to lose this face. Even if this old man can afford to lose this face, our pheasant fort can't." Tang Yanchao roared angrily, "Those who step out, follow this old man. When we get down there and there's no military law to control us, Tang Yanchao will drink to his heart's content with my brothers." On this day, Pheasant Fort's vice-captain, Tang Yanchao, was the first to die at the foot of the mountain outside the fort. Soon after, the remaining 80 people who were under the age of 20 also died in battle. Among them, Biyao was stabbed in the neck by a Beimang cavalryman who was charging at full speed. Before he died, he only had one thought. It would be even better if he could fight his way into Beimang territory and die there. Not long after, a white-haired, dignified old general stopped his horse at the foot of the mountain. After dismounting, He looked at the bloody battlefield where the corpses had been split into two groups. The old man calmly asked a general whose armor was stained with blood beside him, "How many people did we lose?" The general wiped his face fiercely. "The bows and crossbows of the fort in Yuzhou are extremely sharp, and everyone fought to the death. I only know that over 4,000 of us died in battle, and even more were injured." It was precisely the commander of the Eastern Front, Yang Yuanzhan. His expression was grave as he sighed heavily. They still hadn't seen crouching Bao City of the Three Cities at the Gourd Gate, nor had they seen Yan Wenluan's elite infantry. Yang Yuanzhan looked at the pheasant fort on the mountain that was destined to be empty and muttered to himself, "There's no way to fight this battle.